It's a process called sonoluminescence.
The first time I saw sonoluminescence was in a darkened room. I was transfixed to look at this spherical flask of fluid. And you'd look into the center, and in the center see a glowing blue-purple light, which could be seen with the unaided eye. It looked like a star in the heavens.
When we talk about measuring our planet, the standards we all use revert back to base 60 units of miles, minutes, or geometrical degrees. Are you noticing the pattern here? We seem to be encountering a lot of 12s and 60s. Are they related? And if so, how? To answer that piece of the puzzle, we must travel roughly 5,000 years back in time to visit the ancient Sumerian culture of Mesopotamia, for here is where our 1260-based math comes from. This counting system, which was invented by the same people who produced the world's first written language, involved counting the knuckles of the 4 long fingers on one hand and then multiplying them by all 5 digits on the other hand. If you do this, you will get a maximum number of 12 knuckles times 5 fingers, which of course totals 60. 2160, the number expressed by both the cube and the germ of life pattern. You may have already noticed that without the 0, it is exactly half of our magic 432. That's worth noting, but what is even more intriguing is the way this number keeps showing up in other large-scale measurements. To discover one of these measurements, we will need to jump forward from Plato's time to when the Mayan civilization was flourishing. Roughly 1,500 years ago, Mayan stargazers were the most accomplished astronomers the world had ever known. Their concept of cyclical time led to many incredible discoveries: the accurate length of a year, the exact dates of seasonal changes, even the moments when solar and lunar eclipses would occur. But their most amazing discovery was of something known as the precession of the equinox, which makes note of a very slow wobble of Earth's axis. Somehow aware of the fact that this wobble takes 25,920 years to complete, the Mayans called this cycle one great year, with each of its 12 great months requiring 2160 Earth years to complete. And what about this? Did you know that the diameter of our moon, when measured in miles, also happens to total? You guessed it, 2160. Lastly, watch what happens when we apply simple division to this highly synchronous number. 2160 divided by 2 is 1080, the angle sum of the octagon. By 3, 720, the total of the hexagon. By 4, 540, the pentagon. By 5, are you ready? It's the ketone of 432. And by 6, 360, the number of both the square and circle. All F sharps and C sharps, with our 432A thrown into the mix, as if it were some kind of clue to solving a cosmic riddle. Maybe we should look at this number even more closely. As we've stated, our closest celestial neighbor, the moon, is 2160 miles across, and 216 is exactly half of 432. What about the other large object in our sky? Were you aware that our sun is 864,000 miles across? Incredibly, where the moon's base number sequence is half of 432, the sun's number sequence is exactly twice 432. And do you know how many seconds there are in a day? 86,400, or 43,200 for the 12 hours of day and 43,200 for the 12 hours of night. Or try this. Take the 360 degrees found in the circular shape of our sun and moon, and then multiply it by the 12 hours of either day or night. The answer, 4320. Or how about this? What is the only whole number that when squared comes to within 0.01% accuracy to measuring the speed of light? 432.
Seth Putterman called it the star in a jar, a tiny spot of bright light contained in a flask of liquid. This star in a jar is made when a sound wave is passed through a small bubble inside a flask of liquid. And this sound wave makes the bubble do something remarkable. First it expands, then it collapses. And this collapse happens so violently that vapor molecules trapped inside the bubble slam together and heat up so much that the bubble gives off an incredible burst of heat and light, several thousand times a second, giving the appearance of a star. What made the phenomenon so exciting was the temperature of this star in a jar. On its surface alone, the light burns at tens of thousands of degrees. And Seth Putterman now contemplated a tantalizing possibility. Could the core of the collapsing bubble be even hotter? Hot enough for fusion?
One of the mysteries of sonoluminescence is to determine exactly how hot the interior of the bubble gets. In the sun, the interior can be millions of degrees, hot enough to cause fusion. And the thought crossed my mind that perhaps inside the collapsing bubble, the interior of the bubble might also get hot enough to cause fusion.
If so, this would be something truly amazing. By simply bombarding tiny bubbles with sound waves, temperatures of over 10 million degrees would be created. And nuclear fusion, the same reaction that powers the sun, would be happening almost effortlessly here on Earth.
So, is that just a coincidence? The name? Synchronicity, right. There are no mistakes in this vast universe. That's wonderful. Anyway, without further ado, Maury King, please.
What I'm talking about is mainly a plasma effect. From the water, from the Brown's gas in the water, there's a secondary gas which is producing essentially a miracle from the water. Because in there, in the secondary gas, it takes the form of a cluster, a torus form, that when it goes into the internal combustion engine, and that piston is up top dead center, and you hit it with a pulse, you create a vortex ring plasmoid that exhibits anomalous force, anomalous energy, and anomalous acceleration, like a miniature flying saucer propulsion that shoves the piston down. Very different model than just heating air and moving it. And so thus, it is really a pulse plasma phenomena that I will be talking about. I like to show the video clip of Denny Klein because it very quickly summarizes the properties of Brown's gas. So let's play this video.
Turn the machine on. Denny Klein fires up his hot new invention. His machine emits a flame that feels only slightly warm to the touch. But watch what happens when he touches anything else.
Instantaneously, I can burn a hole right down through the center of that brick.
The flame instantly turns hotter than the surface of the sun. Heat so intense it takes only seconds to literally burn a hole through charcoal. 3 seconds turns a brass ball to glowing liquid metal. Tungsten lights up like a sparkler. Steel, lead, and other metals slices on contact. Yet the tip of the welder stays cool to the touch.
No other gas will do this.
Denny Klein uses an alternative fuel source once thought impossible. He says people still have trouble believing him when he reveals his liquid fuel.
Water. Take water and electricity, and we break it down through our very unique electrolysis process.
Klein has just patented his process of converting H2O to HHO, producing a gas that combines the atomic power of hydrogen with the chemical stability of water.
It turns right back to water. You can see the water running off of this.
Klein originally designed his water-burning engine for cutting metal. He thought his invention would replace volatile acetylene in welding factories. Then one day, as he drove to his laboratory in Clearwater, he thought of another way to burn his HHO gas.
On a 100-mile trip, we use about 4 ounces of water.
Klein says his prototype 1994 Ford Escort can travel exclusively on water, though he currently has it rigged to run as a water and gasoline hybrid.
Simply speaking, it can change the world by reducing our dependence on fossil fuels.
These are equivalent to our...
Pete Dominici is helping Klein take his hydrogen technology patents from a 2-room office in Clearwater to consumer markets around the world.
You know what? Microsoft came out of nowhere, came out of the garage. Why not hydrogen technologies?
The duo is already in negotiations with one U.S. automaker and the U.S. government. Their plans have grown from basic welding with water to powering the entire world from the safest and cleanest fuel on Earth. Craig Patrick, Fox News.
Members of Congress recently invited Denny Klein to Washington to demonstrate his technology. Now his company is currently developing a Hummer for the U.S. military that can run on both water and gasoline. So far, his water-powered engines have passed all performance safety inspections, so all systems appear to be go right now, and gives new meaning to the term running water.
You just have to hope that water prices don't go up like...
Can water provide the fuel of the future? While academia has been spurning the topic, hundreds if not thousands of hobbyists and independent investigators worldwide are working on various electrolysis-like projects which put out more energy than was required to run the electrolysis unit. These pursuits go by various names such as Brown's gas and water fuel cells, and have various heroes such as the late Stanley Meyer and more recently John Kansas, who is burning salt water using radio frequencies. A number of commercial interests are involved in the research and development of the various approaches as well. The famous 19th century scientist Michael Faraday defined the limit of output energy possible in any standard electrolysis scenario. It is well known in thermodynamics that it takes more energy to dissociate water into hydrogen and oxygen than can be returned when the hydrogen is burned. But these rogue experimenters of today are reporting output from their setups that exceed Faraday's limit many times over, claiming 7 times, 10 times, or even more, producing as much as 1 liter of gas per hour using just a half a watt of electricity. The factors that seem to contribute to these effects include using a large number of stainless plates close together, the plates rough to facilitate releasing the bubbles, driving the cell using square waves, pulsed DC at kilohertz frequencies, and constantly modifying the frequency to optimize gas production. Moray King, who has published 3 seminal books on zero-point energy, recently put forth a scientific model in which he suggests that the excess energy being observed in these unusual electrolysis setups comes from the zero-point energy by producing charged water gas clusters, which somehow achieve a self-organizing criticality that coherently activates and absorbs zero-point energy. The experimental setups are typically rather simple, which is leading to a proliferation of the number of people reproducing and working to improve the effect and its consistency to the point where it can be used to serve as a practical primary energy source, an energy generator that could operate anywhere there is water. Zero-point energy is everywhere in the universe. It is the foundation of the fabric of space. Other groups, such as Exogen Technologies, are using these processes to purify water. These energy sources could actually produce culinary water as a byproduct. The day of water power via zero-point energy is arriving. Welcome to the future.
Nearly everyone believes the energy is from hydrogen. But electrolysis can't produce excess energy. It simply costs you more energy to, when you burn the hydrogen, it costs you more energy to separate the water than you ever get back when you burn the hydrogen. The real big reason why you can't do it by burning hydrogen is because the internal combustion engine is so inefficient. It's about 20% efficient. You inject the fuel with air, you ignite the fuel, it heats the air, the heat expands the piston, and most of the energy gets wasted as heat. So if it's not burning hydrogen behind these devices, what is the energy source? Well, we're going to cover these breakthrough ideas. The first one is that the zero-point energy itself exists. And would you believe that most of the standard engineering community does not know this? It was not in their textbook, and they get off right there. They just cannot believe that there's actually an energy present in the fabric of space. And the physicists get off on this one. Self-organization can occur. I mean, you can have coherence occurring in this zero-point energy. They just can't believe that that could possibly exist. So the physicists get off. However, when this self-organization occurs, it occurs in these pulse plasma events. And the zero-point energy forms up into these vortex ring plasma forms called plasmoids. And these exhibit the anomalous energy. And they exhibit anomalous force. And furthermore, they can coherently cascade into bigger plasmoids or vortex forms. If they get caught up in a vortex, they can energize the vortex itself. The energetic matter that's in a torus form, that's symmetrical like that, in a somewhat of high energy state, can be converted to a plasmoid when it's abruptly pulsed. Here's the important point. All the energy does not have to exist in this cluster. This cluster is the template or scaffolding or a form that when it's in the internal combustion engine and gets sparked, that's when it gets converted to a plasmoid. That's when the big energy spills into the system. That's when the anomalous force gets manifested to move the piston. We're actually moving the piston by zero-point energy. And moreover, these clusters can form in inert gas and in water. It's a miracle they can form in water because it makes the experiments so easy. And the reason I chose these electrolyzer projects for the last 5 years, or 6 years now, is because it offers the opportunity for massive replication by hobbyists. Everyone could actually successfully build a zero-point energy device if we learn how to make more of those charged water clusters. And I'll give you a clue. You cavitate the water. This makes the internal combustion engine actually an advantage instead of a disadvantage. You inject the energetic clusters, you give it the high voltage pulse, there's repulsion, there's anomalous force, and it moves the piston by a zero-point energy effect, a pulse plasma effect, moving the piston. Thus, it opens the opportunity to retrofit all the automobiles of the world to easily run on zero-point energy. What we'll see here, an archetype form that keeps repeating, the energetic torus. The recurring pattern occurs 4 times in this presentation. The collapsing cavitation bubble takes that form, from which that's a picture of it. The plasmoids, of course, are vortex rings, and they're in torus form, and the inert gas clusters, and the water gas clusters. Of course, the Thrive movement. Have you all seen this one? Yeah, everybody's seen this one. That's the latest incarnation on this. When I started in the 70s, people had this vision of toruses and everything else. I've had it, for ball lightning. It was like everybody's getting this revelation of, and I called it donuts on the brain. And it was like the good Lord was trying to turn us all into Homer Simpsons. So we'll go through these breakthrough ideas. We'll look at the zero-point energy. In the beginning, in the 18th century, everybody believed in the ether to support. It was the energetic substrate that supports the light. The Michelson and Morley experiment came along. They said we can't detect a static ether, just one form of the ether. But it made general relativity very popular, or in special relativity. However, it wasn't long before an energetic substrate was invented for physics when quantum mechanics came along. And they said there's this underlying jitter in the fabric of space. Now, it's very interesting historically that we believe in an ether in our science to 1905, where relativity becomes accepted. We think the space is empty up until 1930, which comes back in the form of energetic fluctuations. So here we have a 25-year gap in the history of science that completely dominates our beliefs today. That the engineers just don't see it. They don't believe that there's an energetic substrate. And the good news is this energy that can make these virtual pairs form up and all this activity is far, far more dynamic and far more open for energetic possibilities than that old static ether was. We really are onto a great model as for how the physicists view the vacuum. There's lots of papers in the open literature, especially in the Physical Review, regarding zero-point energy, and it can show how quantum effects can rise from it, how the hydrogen atom can be stabilized by it, how it can be an energy source without violating thermodynamics. Thus, it's a politically very important paper. It can be the source of gravity, and an exciting paper was how it could be a source of inertia, which means that the zero-point energy is the foundation of inertia, which means that if you can make a technology that coheres the zero-point energy just a little bit, you can create an inertial drive which allows you to go under abrupt accelerations without feeling the inertial stress. Flying saucer propulsion. Basically, it's in our science. The zero-point energy is modeled like a turbulent, chaotic plasma, with electric flux entering and immediately leaving. They call it the quantum foam. This is Wheeler's model from geometrodynamics. But can self-organization be triggered in this quantum foam? At first, the answer appears to be no. It's chaotic. It's random. Random things must forever remain random. Thus, the second law of thermodynamics. But the breakthrough idea is that self-organization occurs. And this idea was given to us by Ilya Prigogine, who won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1977, showing how a system may evolve from chaos to self-organization. And the system, any system that fulfilled these three requirements would exhibit self-organization. The system must be nonlinear, far from equilibrium, and have an energy flux through it. Now, what's the energy flux for the zero-point energy? This diagram is very important. This is Wheeler's orthogonal flux model. That flatland slot represents three-dimensional space. In string theory, they call it our three-brane. And when the flux comes through incoherently, we just come straight through with random jitter. We say that's the background zero-point energy. If there's a slight tilt to it, so there's an alignment in our space, we call that the polarized vacuum. And if there's vorticity coming through it, a spiral as it comes through, that is the elementary particles. Thus, in this model, the flux of the zero-point energy, this orthogonal flux, as it spirals, stabilizes all particles in existence. It's like the flow of the stream stabilizes the whirlpool. So this was a pretty tough sell, especially to the engineers, and I had a hard time explaining it. So I once in the 80s made the hyperspace workshop, teaching higher dimensions to housewives. And what we did is we got these little cardboard slots, and we put them down on the table and looked through them, and we pretended we were flatlanders. And we had no awareness of the third dimension, and we would bounce balls, and that would represent like the wave-particle duality, and then we would see if we could tell if something was connected or not connected, and that was the idea of quantum entanglement. And guess what? They got it. And they went home to their husbands and talked about orthogonal fluxes and orthorotation of the energy and of hyperspace vortices. And the husbands would go, "Not tonight, hon, I got a headache." And what's gotten into you? Why? ZPE. ZPE for you and me. Robert Lachlan is on the same page with self-organization. He's the Nobel laureate. His thesis was everything arises from self-organization of collectives, including the laws of physics themselves. I highly recommend his book. So what are the principles for cohering the zero-point energy? Work with a highly nonlinear system like a plasma. abruptly drive it far from equilibrium with an abrupt spark or abrupt discharge, and maximize the zero-point energy interaction using ions, nuclei, and you get coherent effects with vortex forms. Conduction band electrons, that's your normal electricity running in wires, copper wires. They are effectively in thermodynamic equilibrium with the zero-point energy. Thus, we don't see very many effects of activating zero-point energy with our normal everyday conductors and electronics. However, the nucleus of an atom shows vacuum polarization lines that converge very steeply onto the nucleus, and thus any type of abrupt motion of nuclei is an activator, a coherent activator of zero-point energy. In this model, we can see a surge, the ion surge, how it can bend that zero-point energy a little bit in our space. This is, Tom Bearden likes to call that orthorotation, where the orthogonal flux rotates in to our three-dimensional flatland spot. So I think when our politicians in America just shout, "Drill, baby, drill," that us breakthrough energy movementeers should shout back, "Orthorotate, baby, orthorotate." Oh, please note, my wife also told me not to say that. In the experiments, even in the ion collision experiments, they see it. They call it exotic coherent vacuum states arising on quantum electrodynamics. They see it in the plasma experiments. When the ions move synchronously, they call that the ion acoustic mode of the plasma, and is known to exhibit energetic anomalies in the plasma experiments. And these anomalies are associated with self-organizational modes in the plasma. And they see large radiant energy absorption, high-frequency spikes, and runaway electrons, and anomalous heating. And this self-organization tends to be a torus form, a plasma vortex ring. The rotation around the ring, it's like a helix, a tornado closing on itself. And to make these, you need pure symmetry. So here's the breakthrough idea that those plasmoids cohere the zero-point energy. Ken Shoulders probably offers the best experimental evidence for these. He launches micron-size plasmoids with just a sharp pulse from a capacitor. It must be very sharp. And he knows the power on the capacitor, the energy in a capacitor, and he can see the damage these things do when they hit a conductor. They have craters in it. They can high melting of high melting point material like aluminum oxide. The Russians are on this, and we're describing in detail. This is Mesat's work. What happens at the tip of that electrode? This is a blow up of that tip. What happens? There's a little liquid metal protuberance just before it starts to come out, and then the tip of that breaks off, that liquid metal, and it's that symmetry of that tip breaking off that creates the symmetrical vortex ring flow. So Ken Shoulders went ahead and coated his electrodes with liquid metal so he could replenish the tip to make the pure EV launcher. And he called it EV, was Latin for electron validum, strong charge, because he saw a tremendous amount of what seemed to be a lot of charge present in these things. And later on, when he got convinced that there was a zero-point energy effect, he called them exotic vacuum objects. And they contain about 100 million electrons, 100,000 ions. The charge to mass ratio always seems to settle in about at the electron, and of course, they contain excessive energy. He's seen chains. They tend to form into chains and clumps. He's seen positive EVs. And this is interesting because when they strike a conductor and decay away and give back their pulse, he sees no 1/2 MeV gamma rays at all. So that means they are not comprised of positrons. Instead, he's on the fundamental mechanism of self-organization of manifesting charge from the vacuum itself. And he believes he's on a very fundamental discovery of how to manifest self-organization from the vacuum in general. They form pairs, just like pair production. You can see them spiraling around each other. The black EV is very important. They can go quiet. They still exist in a metastable state. This is very important when we talk about the nature of the water cluster, because they don't have to have all the energy being manifested, and a small pulse can reactivate them. We'll be revisiting that idea. So basically, these are the anomalies. They can adhere to dielectrics like ball lightning. Many can clump in the necklace formation. They bore holes in high melting point ceramics. And they disrupt the electron bonds of the metal they hit. It is not heat that is disrupting the bonds. It's something more coherent. It's like the bonds just let go.
What is very interesting is that now, when the separation of the proton and electron happens, which I explain in detail in the book, is that usually we see fragments coming out. They call it radiation leakage or whatever, yeah, of the separation. And this is actually a light. And this light is created not out of what the material of the neutron leaves out. Some of the light comes about because the two magnetosphere of the electron and proton move away from each other, and they create light. And that's what we see as light radiations, gamma rays, and some visible light. What is very interesting, and that's where in the earlier talk I spoke about it, where the fusion technology of today is going wrong, and they will not achieve fusion. As I said all the time, fusion technology of today, the way it's going through tokamak, is a sweet dream which will never come true. The reason being, I explain in a few seconds. First of all, in the world of fusion, they talk about billions of degrees they want to achieve with the center of the sun. As we know, and we are constantly in touch with the plasma physicists and in tokamak systems, is that the gravitational field within the center of these tokamak reactors is 0.1% G, 0.1.6% G. If they are going to replicate the temperatures and the fusion condition within the center of the sun, what is the gravitational field which is necessary for fusion? Where do they come up with the concept of thinking this as a plasma? This is a normal plasma. They use magnetic fields to squeeze it, and then what do they do? When they squeeze it, they make two hard balls out of this plasma, which is soft and gentle, and they try to fuse two hard balls. This does not work. This is a fallacy that the fusion technology can carry on to just do research and development. But first of all, it's illogical to squeeze two balls, which are soft and gentle, you can work with, to a small hard ball, and then accelerate it and crash it together to fuse. Of course it will never happen. It's a fantastic idea. It's a good research, but not much. In reality, I have a very simple system. This is the shape of a tokamak, a torus reactor. Yeah, very simple. I explain where the difference is. What's the difference? What we developed, we call the plasma dilution technology. It's much easier to mix the content of two soft plasmas, like the egg. That's what it is. An egg is literally another plasma. It's easier to make an omelette with this than trying to make an omelette with the content of two hard-boiled eggs. No one can, and that's exactly what plasma physicists are trying to do. They squeeze, they cook the plasma to a hard ball, and then they want to make an omelette, mix it together. It won't happen. We developed the technology, which what we do, we soften. We soften the plasmatic magnetic field or magnetosphere around the plasma. It's very easy, it's soft. We soften it. So what they call a Coulomb barrier is reduced. We reduce the Coulomb barrier within the reactor to the level we like, because the rest of the environment of the plasma is in the reactor is the same level. So we come to the level that we would like to release the matter. We take the matter out. We would like to release the antimatter to use this magnetic field strength. We do the same. And then what happens? It's very easy. When it's finished, we allow them to come back to the position. We don't use the matter. We use this magnetic field. And this reduction in the magnetic field strength of the magnetosphere of the plasma, we call it plasma dilution technology. And that is very easy. We can achieve fusion of anything, matter, antimatter, heavy elements. We have even developed the technology at the same time that we can allow the electron, what are called interatomic fusion. It's easier to fuse atom internally than bringing two plasmas of two different atoms together to fuse. These two were made from the same source. So if I weaken this, I can allow the electron to come in and get absorbed. I get a fusion. I can handle temperature at this level. But when you come to create a tokamak condition, several hundreds of millions of degrees temperature, 7,000 degrees burn the shuttle and re-entry. We don't have the material, we don't have the knowledge, have access to these kind of materials to stand these kind of heats. And as far as I know and the other scientists know, there is no such a material in the universe. But we can reduce the Coulomb's barrier strength, magnetic field strength, because we create plasma the same as this. They just open up. So in fact, they all become part of, if you call this a reactor, the same. So I separate them. And in separating it, I have a plasma. Everything is in the same pattern. Everything is the same constituent matter. But now I can use the antimatters within the one core in interaction with the other core. The same principle as we talked about creation of gravity. What happens? I create magnetic field, a strength magnetic field of antimatter in the outer core, and I create a strength magnetic field of the matter, antimatter, within the inner core of my reactors. What do I have? A strong, powerful, gravitational, magnetic field condition. This is the breakthrough. This is what we understood. This is what brings back the whole philosophy of gravity, antimatter, and dark matter, and all other factors together. So we don't need to burn fuel. I finish with my job. I reach the position I want. I want to shut the reactor. I decrease the plasma conditioned strength field of the material. Everything goes back together. Voila. I can control, I can manage a few hundred degrees where the Coulomb barriers are in the same level. So this is what it is. This is creating energy, creating motion, producing materials through the new understanding of fundamental matters, which are the matter, antimatter, and dark matter, without burning fuel, without causing and creating waste and nuclear waste and the rest of it, what we've seen. We have gone so far by burning matters that even the planet Earth creating limitation for what we can do any further. With this technology, hydrogen plasma, unlimited, no waste, no any damage to the environment. So that's what we call plasma dilution technology in conjunction with magnetic gravitational positioning for motion and for creating energies at all sorts of levels. At the same time, this is very simple. We can read in the book. We have shown very simply how it's done. We have explained very simple. If you do have such a control, this is what I just explained. Internally, a barrier, and external. So you have two core reactors, outside and inside, like planet Earth. So you achieve very simple results with a very simple actions. So we will speak about the parallel systems and what people call unidentified flying objects. Through this technology, nothing is identified, everything is known.
And there's experiments showing element transmutation. And if you transmute radioactivity, you have a possibility for technology of radioactive remediation. There's a whole nother presentation based on that very topic that, by the way, at the end, I'll tell you how to download it. So the breakthrough idea, second, is that the clusters can combine coherently to create even greater effects. And this happens in vortex flow and in vortex ring flow. So Ken has done experiments where he can cascade these EVs. One EV tends to launch the next, and if he has a chain of them, he can make large plasmoid forms that are they're centimeter in size. He hates working with them because when they hit the conductor, they put out such a big EMP, he fries all his electronic equipment in his lab. So he'll say, I'm staying away from those, I'll just study the small ones. He has one of the biggest force anomalies by just pre-making a vortex of water and shooting an EV right down it, right down the vortex. He says, you would not believe the force that he gets from this event. So the energetic vortex can cohere the zero-point energy when it's large, like a plasma vortex, because the ions in the plasma can cohere the zero-point energy if they take a vortex form. And it's like we are entraining the ether to follow the vortex. That's it. And so we see this type of thing in tornadoes. Here's an example of plasmas in the lab and comparing them to a tornado. So you can envision not only tornadoes, but lightning bolts could possibly have their big energy sourced from the zero-point energy itself. Every few years you'll hear about a vortex device, a plasma vortex free energy machine. These are some of the fastest that get suppressed. They're a flash in the pan every time they come up. You're lucky to even hear about them. So here's the breakthrough idea. Energetic clusters can also exist in inert gas. Now the beauty of inert gas is it does not combine chemically. There's no combustion with oxygen. It offers pure experiments to study these anomalies, of pulse plasma anomalies, with energetic clusters. And would you believe it? The inert gases, when you spark them a lot, don't just come back down as separate. They form into clusters, especially if there's a mixture. And they seem to have this energetic form like those black EVs. So when you hit them with a laser, and they've done this in the laboratory, you see this anomalous explosive force. And they studied the formation of the cluster, and it tends to have symmetry to it. And the symmetry is very important because what we're trying for when we pulse it is to get that vortex ring. And of course, the famous PAP engine was based on that. I highly recommend Eugene Maloff's issue 51 of Infinite Energy. It was completely dedicated to a number of projects associated with exploring the PAP engine. And one of the things interesting about the PAP engine is notice the cylinder itself. When it closes, you'll see a vortex ring flow as the cylinder closes of the plasma itself. And so when they pulse it, they made a giant, large plasmoid, a plasmoid that's large, that was comprised of the small energetic clusters in the inert gas. And he keeps them energized in the PAP engine because he uses some radioactive material to keep things in a high energy state. So here's an idea. The energetic clusters can form in water. This is the real miracle because it offers easy experiments. Peter Grenou was one of the first to explore abrupt pulsing just in water. He has a chamber of water, and he does a very abrupt pulse and creates a force anomaly. And he's also was an expert in high-speed photography, and he was able to photograph the plasmoid that was produced if it was abrupt enough. And so what happens when the discharge is very abrupt, it's like a crack of lightning. There's explosive explosion that throws the weight up in the air, and he photographs how high it goes. And he says, well, I have a nice force anomaly. And by the way, I blew out my bolts. And he didn't even count that. He's blowing the damn thing apart. However, Gary Johnson of Kansas State University did a replication of this work. And what he does, he made his device, his chamber, designed to blow apart. And he could throw those weights up the guide wires, and he measures how high he throws them up, and then he knows he can measure, well, if they went that high and they're this heavy, how much energy proves he has excess energy as well as excess force from the abrupt explosion. He said, and if you don't do it abruptly enough, when you dump the capacitor, nothing happens, just a normal discharge in water. But when you do it abruptly enough, it is the crack, like a lightning crack or thunder. He has to wear the big earmuffs to protect his ears when he does these experiments. It's a huge bang. Harold Aspin writes about this too. It's in the regular literature about these enormous explosive events from these pulsed ion motions in water. Here's a website that explores, hey, can we tap that to move the piston? An internal combustion engine is pretty crude because we're just working straight up with water and a very abrupt discharge, but they're exploring that. I recommend that website. And Stan Meyer's latest device is somewhat famous for trying to take advantage of this particular event. And let's play this video.
A car that runs on water instead of gasoline. Can it be true? Well, inventor Stanley Meyer made an announcement today in Colorado Springs. He says he's come up with a device that will hook up to any engine and allow it to run on good old H2O. News 13's Kurt Goff tonight on the possible impact of the water fuel cell.
Stanley Meyer says the answer to dependence on foreign oil lies all around us. In seawater, tap water, and rainwater. Any kind of H2O, he says, can power just about every type of engine. How? With the water fuel cell. It fits in the palm of his hand, but it could revolutionize the world.
You're talking about a pollution-free, totally new source of energy, the voltage dissociation of water.
The fuel cell converts water into a gas, hydrogen oxygen, which is released in the form of thermo-explosive energy.
So the water fuel injector simply replaces the spark plug. We hook it to a hydrogen computer system which regulates and meters the flow going into the injector. It processes the water in such a way to release its thermal explosive energy.
The man who invented an engine that can run on water says he's been offered $1 billion in cash by oil-producing countries to sell his patent. So far, he hasn't sold. Environmental specialist Jan Porter talked to the inventor, who thinks that the U.S. auto industry could produce cars that run on water now if they wanted to.
Our industrial base of the world is based on the utilization.
Stan Meyer has a car that runs on water, and that's drawing crowds at this year's Extraordinary Science Conference in Colorado Springs. Myers has developed what is called the water fuel cell injector. The injector breaks down the water molecule into hydrogen and oxygen, and the hydrogen is what powers the car.
Basically, all we do is replace the spark plug and replace it with the water fuel cell injectors you see right here. We simply feed ordinary non-processed water or processed water in here, and as the water goes into the injector, it hits a very high pulse voltage frequency, which instantly converts it into thermal explosive energy. And as a result, we can run this car down the road on water.
Meyer's invention was introduced in Britain earlier this month, and now the Brits have followed him here.
We recently took a scientific delegation to witness Stan's work, to really evaluate it, and came back saying, this is one of the most important inventions of the century.
Now, as most of you know, Stan Meyer's intention was, with that plug, to retrofit automobiles. And he was murdered in the 90s. I personally knew Stan. He came to my workshop on zero-point energy at a conference in the 90s, and I got to interact with him with exchanges, mail exchanges and phone calls before that. And you can go to that link and read about an investigative reporter dove in all the details surrounding his death. But basically, they were celebrating in the restaurant a verbal deal that these Belgian investors, these mysterious investors, were going to fund the project. And they poisoned him. But the good news is, Stan's brother, Steve Myers, his twin brother, he was the electrical engineer. None of the Stan Myers information is lost whatsoever. He continues to work. Unfortunately, he's reclusive and doesn't want to participate because he's really distraught over what happened. We'll look into this patent on the water injector plug. We're going to see it's really not that simple. He's injecting three things. We have injecting the water, ionized air, and argon, a rare gas. That's interesting. No, very few people know that. Why argon? You know, well, argon's used in sonoluminescence. It seems like it's helping there. There's 3 rings. Here's the front end. It's like a shower head, right? The water's in the middle ring. The rare gas is in the next ring. There's the outer ring, and the ionized air is on the middle ring. That mixture is pre-energized. And he has quite a bit, using lasers and his high voltage waveform and everything else to really get that thing in a high energy state. And then they hit it with a big voltage pulse inside the internal combustion engine. So what we're going to explore is the secondary gas, the Brown's gas. And this allows us to pre-energize the water that we're putting in the electrolyzer and put it in this gaseous form. And this Brown's gas is just not hydrogen and oxygen. The secondary gas, George Weissman called electrically expanded water, or what I call charged water gas clusters. This is the magical gas. Yul Brown is credited for discovering the energetic anomalies in the welding application, so he duly gets credit for this discovery of the gas, and it should be named after him. It manifests a cool flame, just a little bit above the boiling point of water. You can run your hand through the flame without burning it. Yes, got the touch. It doesn't boil water. And so you can see these videos at your leisure, yet it can vaporize tungsten, which is over 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit to vaporize tungsten. You'll see from these temperatures, no welding torch can vaporize tungsten. It's not hot enough. Yet this little gas that's coal can vaporize tungsten. What does this mean? It means that the energy of this gas is stored coherently. It's just like Ken Shoulder's EVs. The plasma in that welding torch is little micron-sized EVs that when they strike the metal, cause the atomic bonds just to let go. Right? That's the secret. It's the water cluster gas that turns into plasmoids when they go into the plasma form. The anomalies are similar to the EVs. That adheres to matter. It's polarized. There's this electric shock when it implodes. Instead of exploding, cool flame, yet it can vaporize tungsten. Cuts cleanly through anything. You can weld to similar materials. There's claims of neutralizing radioactive waste as well as element transmutation. We'll see there's so many similarities to the charge cluster phenomena. We're on to the same thing. I highly recommend George Weissman's website. He's been researching this for years, and as a result of his work, he has really caused a lot of success in inventing communities, making the correct form of the gas. So he has a lot more of this electrically expanded water. So we know there's something interesting going on with sonoluminescence in water. This is ultrasonics cavitates the water. And normally when you have cavitation in the bulk of the water, the bubble is symmetric. If you mix some inert gas like argon or xenon with it, you'll see this bluish light come off. This created a lot of excitement amongst the standard scientific community because they said, wow, if the spectrum of the bluish light is thermal, represents like heat, that means we have temperatures, huge temperatures that can actually do fusion. However, Julian Schwinger, Nobel laureate, suggested that the abrupt compression of the bubble would actually induce a zero-point energy coherence, converting the zero-point energy to light. And therefore, in this phenomena, the good news is you're getting to some zero-point energy. The bad news is you're not getting that much, and you're wasting it as light. So we'd like to capture that energy. When the bubble collapses near a surface, right, the bubble starts to dimple in a torus form. And right through the donut of the torus is what's called the reentrant jet. And all the energy of the collapsing cavitation bubble gets concentrated to a nanometer scale in that reentrant jet. And there's extreme pressures as this collapse occurs. And at the tip of that reentrant jet, the pressure is over 300,000 psi down to the nanoscale. And under these pressures, water can take, and shown to take, a solid state form that Mark Leclerc calls a macroionic water crystal. And the miracle of this crystal is at the very tip, he calls it a plasma bow shock wave. That's where the zero-point energy coherence is occurring, and its behavior is just like Ken Shoulders' EVOs. Mark is able to measure imprints. This is a rust crystal. When he has microscopic photograph, he can show these imprints are very pretty of the crystal striking the material. Here's a summary of what it does. What his trick was, he lets the reentrant jet, rather than hit the plate and immediately damage it, he forms it over holes. And then it goes through the hole, and then it can strike something on the other side. And it self-accelerates, so it really builds up a lot of power. And that was the trick for his to demonstrate transmutation. He's investigated its structure. It seems to have down its tail linear water and an OH chain. Around the circumference is like a hexagon type water crystal shape. And the interesting part is the plasma bow shock wave, because that's where the zero-point energy coherence seems to be occurring. And it creates the trenches, and he has observed and measured self-acceleration up to Mach 4 as he lets this thing build up a head of steam. And Shoulders' EVOs likewise observes the self-acceleration phenomena. It's like a flying saucer propulsion event. Here's a picture that Mark drew of the material. He calls it the Leclerc effect, where this plasma bow shock wave, just like Shoulders' EVO, when it strikes a surface, it causes transmutation. And down the chain's the linear OH chain. And is there any other experimental evidence for this chain? Well, it turns out that Chris Ekman at Idaho State University got some preliminary evidence of a linear isomer of water where there's extra electrons in the d orbitals, and it's in a higher energy state. He did some X-ray diffraction studies, and there's some papers that he wrote suggesting that this form could exist. He had some help with a plasma physicist to show that it can exist, but the problem is, as a lone molecule, it's simply not stable. It just immediately collapses back to normal water. However, if it participates in a cluster, especially if that chain can close into a loop, which Mark Leclerc has recorded, that those chains can close into loops. If that loop is at a submicron size, where it can be somewhat stable, it's light enough to be a gas. It's not, and it will start to come out of the water. And if these electrons are up at the d orbitals, this is very similar to Rydberg matter, that the cluster itself is in this torus form, this metastable torus form that fulfills everybody's model. Foster Gamble's model of the torus form, George Weissman's model of electrically expanded water, and of course, Chris Ekman's model of linear water. So everybody, this could be it. This is the magical form of the secondary gas. When this is hit with a pulse, electrical pulse, sparking in the internal combustion engine, it converts right into the plasmoid. And it's the plasmoid in the cylinder of the internal combustion engine that drives that piston. There's the magic. That's the miracle in the water. Many successful inventors and inventions cavitate the water inadvertently. They didn't know they were trying for it, but we'll see that the characteristics of their inventions that seem to do really well in making excess gas and seem to have excess energy were the results of cavitation. And there's lots of ways to cavitate. The most common way is just make some electrolysis gas in very narrow gaps in the electrolyzer, and that naturally bubbles and cavitates the water. Pulling a Venturi vacuum does it, blowing air through the electrolyzer does it, oscillating electromagnetic fields, any type of field oscillation, because the water's charged, they'll oscillate with the field, that'll churn the water. Any vibration, mechanical vibrations, sonic, ultrasonic vibrations like they do in sonoluminescence, all of this cavitates the water. Of course, you can just work with a straight-up cavitating pump, just cut to the chase. Mechanical vibration. This is probably, OMASA probably is one of the best projects for making the pure water cluster gas. What he does is he uses these mechanical paddles that he jerks. He's only running them at 100 hertz, but he jerks them, and if you jerk fast enough underwater with that paddle, pulls a little bit of vacuum behind the paddle, which makes the cavitation bubbles. And then he runs an electrolyzer, and he makes this pure gas that he stores. He can even store it under pressure, but this is very important. When he does so, his containment leaks hydrogen. He will not contain hydrogen if he has any residual hydrogen. He will simply let that leak away, but he can store under pressure this water gas, and 2 years later, he's gone for as much as 2 years, continue to use it to show it still exhibits the anomalies of Brown's gas. And I think because of the significance of this work, this video is very valuable especially to the researchers. It is spoken in Japanese, but they have English subtitles. And so we could play this video, and I think it's seminal. It's highly significant.
東京大田区のプラントメーカー、日本テクノ。日本テクノの大政社長が開発したこの攪拌機。従来のようなプロペラが回転するものではなく、低周波の振動で攪拌する。中の水は安定して循環するという。洗剤を入れても泡が全く立たない。一体なぜか。通常電気分解すると酸素と水素が発生する。しかし大政社長が過去にこの攪拌機を使ってメッキをしたところ、難点とされる大きな泡や水素の爆発が発生しなかった。
振動が伝わっているために表面張力が壊れてですね、泡が形成しようとっても壊れちゃうんですね。だから泡は作りたくても作れない状態がこの現象じゃないかというふうに言われてるんですね。
これをヒントにした大政社長、水に電気を流すと白い煙のようなものが。これは酸水素ガス。普通の電気分解だと水素と酸素のガスが別々に出てくる。このガスは振動攪拌機でないと得られない。
酸素と水素のガスがですね、元素がナノマイクロバブルになって出るところが従来のですね電気分解と全く違うんですね。そしてあと安全な酸素と水素の私の考えでは結合体のガスが得られると。
水素ガスは分子が細かいため容器などに保存しても漏れやすい。しかしこのガスは2年近く同じ圧力で保存されている。大政社長は酸素と水素2つの分子が結合し特殊な構造を作っているからだと考える。ガスの用途はまずバーナーの燃料だ。温度はおよそ700度で火の中では低い方だが鉄板を切断できるほどのエネルギーに変わるという。さらに新たな用途も生まれようとしている。東京海洋大学の伊藤教授、7月に酸水素ガスを用いてある実験を成功させた。タンクに溜めた酸水素ガスを燃料に小型エンジンを動かすことができた。空気の取り込み口は塞いでいる。ガスの中に酸素があるため燃焼時に空気中の酸素が必要ないからだ。水からできた燃料のため燃焼後はまた水に戻り有害な排ガスは発生しないという。
非常に安定な圧力を加えても爆発しないし、インフラとして整備して自由に給油と同じように給ガスができるような状況が作れれば自動車の燃料として置き換わる可能性というのが十分にあって。
ガスの正体を調べようと大政社長は液化を試みた。酸素はマイナス183度、水素はマイナス253度で液化するが、このガスはおよそマイナス178度で液化した。
構造はわからないにしても新しい、地球上でその水の第二の水ができた。エンジンとか発電機だとか 今化石燃料に変わるものが水から作れてまた水に戻るというふうに、究極のね、地球を救うね、燃料ですよね。全ての燃料にしたいと。
解明できていない部分が多い酸水素ガス。だが大きな可能性を秘めている。
Well, you're stunned. Don't you speak Japanese? We can also cavitate the water with oscillating electric fields and pulse waveforms. Exogen is a good example of that. I like Exogen because they have an interesting story. Their inventor, primary inventor, was Stephen Barry Chambers. Stephen Barry Chambers' sister is named Marilyn Chambers, who happened to be the wife of Stan Meyer. Shortly after Stan Meyer's death, she carted up all the plans, went up to her brother, electrical engineer, and they founded Exogen. And this was the patent they produced. These 3 patents are actually identical. And I looked at the patent, and I said, what's different about that compared to all the other patents I see on the gas? And they had one interesting thing different. They put a toroidal coil under the water. And I was going, what's the purpose of that? Well, after investigating, it turns out that an oscillating toroidal coil surrounds itself with an oscillating electrical field in a torus shape. The gas is charged, as we're talking charged water cluster gas. It will cause the water to go into turbulence following the oscillating electric field. So there was an example of that. And that's how he did it. Of course, sonic and ultrasonic excitation is very common. And there's a fascinating project on the web that intrigues me because he uses an ultrasonic water fogger, and the inventor is anonymous. He's anomalously anonymous. He goes by the handle the power to be. It looks like he took advantage of something that was studied at the University of Michigan, which is what happens when you vibrate the zinc oxide crystals. Right? These crystals are small, form about a micron. They're piezoelectrics. And gas comes off of this. And of course, everybody thinks the gas is hydrogen, because after all, if it comes out of an electrolyzer and burns, what else could it be? That's what. But here, there's no electrolyzer involved. It's just having these crystals. You have to keep them in a wettable envelope so they just don't get sloshed all away. This is just freely up on the web for people to investigate. And it's absolutely intriguing because here this might be the easiest way to make this secondary gas. Circulating the water is another great idea because you can both cavitate it and charge it by electrostatic rubbing, which means you don't have to feed current into the system. After all, we're not trying to make hydrogen here. We're not trying to do electrolysis. We're just trying to electrically stimulate the water. But why not just stimulate it like with electrostatic rubbing? This idea comes from TV from Vinslick, a seminal paper called Bubbles and Steam Electricity. It's up on the web. In one paper, it explains how steam electricity, waterfall ionization, sonoluminescence, and thunderclouds charge separation all occur from the zero-point energy. This idea, we mimic the dynamics of a thundercloud. In a thundercloud, small ice crystals called grappa are blown up and comes down as rain. You can see this circulating in the thundercloud, how we build up charge. It's just like a Van de Graaff generator. As we circulate the dielectric band, we transfer charge from the combs. So in this idea, the electrolyzer, the water in the electrolyzer that's distilled water acts like the dielectric belt, and the rough conductive plates act like the combs. So what we're doing is we're going to circulate the water as fast as we can and electrostatically charge it, as well as cavitate it from the circulation. So in this embodiment, the gas would be produced and it would go upward, and we keep churning the water. Another embodiment, we could use a cavitating pump itself. And when we circulate the water in the other direction, the gas that gets produced helps move the water because it wants to go upward. And don't forget the spark arresters to prevent flashback into the reservoir. And I believe this will likely be the winning embodiment because we use a straight up pump to circulate the water very fast. And we vibrate the plates by reed cavitation. Reed meaning like the vibrations in a harmonica, where the reeds vibrate because the plates are so close together, they vibrate like a shower massage as the water rapidly circulates. So we have everything occurring from this one embodiment. We get electrostatic rubbing, we get cavitation, we get integration of energy in the water as we circulate it over and over again. The energy content from these charged water gas clusters keep building up in the water. Right? You could even, if it's highly energized, you can even take some of that water, spray it into a carburetor, and give the illusion that water's a fuel. So here's the goal. If we really have zero-point energy, and we really can activate all of this with tremendous amount of energy in a small amount of gas, we should be able to prove that we have a new energy source by making a self-running system. And the best system to make is a genset. So we have a motor-generator combination. The generator makes the electricity that you rectify, use it to drive your electrolyzer or drive your pump if you're circulating. And if you indeed, you can make such a system idle, just idle, due to the notorious inefficiency of the internal combustion engine, it would prove, a grand slam home run proof, that you're onto a new energy source. Because this is considered impossible. And yet 2 teams have recently claimed success. I really like Steve Eaton. This came on. He joined with Jeff Sokol at Hybrid Tech. He worked with a pretty good generator. He made a self-running closed-loop system. Jeff Sokol put pictures in his e-book that within a couple months, he was ordered to get them out. He didn't require a whole lot of power, like running the 6 liters per minute, only at 30 amps. And he had some excess power to run a power drill and light some bulbs. Here's some photographs from the e-book. Jeff sent me a complimentary e-book. It's a good thing I made the pictures because it's gone. It's yanked out of the e-book. But there was a small prototype device. The electrical wiring was pretty standard for these things, and it ends up getting 4 volts across his concentric tubes. Just running it at DC, very narrow gap, 1/32 of an inch. That's highly significant. And you see the spiral, he separated his tubes by the spiral filament, like a fishing line, very, very thin. It forced the gas to spiral up the electrodes. So imagine having the gas-water mixture and its tight gap, and it's trying to spiral up, and all that rubbing's going on, and all that sputtering's going on. So he's creating a lot of turbulence inside those tubes to create more of this charged water cluster gas. He felt he had to make a big device to have all that activity go off to make the unit self-running. And had he known about the circulation trick, he may have been able to do it with the small device. Here in Germany, Oliver and Valentine went on the web, working with a very, very cheap generator. They're lucky. This thing, maybe 15% efficient. They were just hobbyists on a very low budget. They had the jerry-rigged the timing and everything else because you want to fire these things at top dead center. And they did a lot of work. And they used a very good cell, the Anton cell. It has 1 millimeter gap, which allows them to have all that turbulence inside the gap. In summary, zero-point energy ideas can actually be a source of energy when self-organization occurs, and it typically takes the form of these plasmoids or these EVs, and the more vorticity you put on it, the more coherent it becomes. The torus form keeps repeating. Electrical discharge of a torus of matter in this metastable state takes it to the plasmoid, and it's here At this moment, the zero-point energy is activated, and we get the anomalous force and energy. And the examples are the black EVs, the inert gas clusters, and these charged water gas clusters that we can create from cavitation. The form that it takes from the cavitation, the collapsing cavitation bubble forms the reentrant jet, which squeezes that microionic water crystal. That can form into a ring, providing the basis of the stable torus, and it has coherent energy. Lots of ways to cavitate, but most typically is electrolysis gas in the narrow gaps. That's where cavitation is typically done inadvertently. Blowing air through, pulling Venturi vacuum, any of the vibrations, mechanical, acoustical, or oscillating electric fields, will cavitate the water. The electrolyzers, the electrodes are typically rough but clean, with tiny gaps. The more narrow, the better, because it causes turbulence, once again, cavitation. And the various electrical stimulations can be used. And we want to minimize the current because we're not trying to make hydrogen. And a good idea to get frictional charging by rubbing. So we work with distilled water in those. And when we circulate, we charge by rubbing. It helps create turbulence and cavitation. The winning embodiment is the Reed cavitation. That looks like that's going to be the winner because it does everything. And the recycling in the water keeps integrating its energy content. It makes more and more charged water gas clusters in the water. Action item. The chemistry departments make the brown gas, vent away the hydrogen. What the heck is left? What is the strange gas that continues to burn? And inventors make self-running systems, self-running gensets. You get those to idle. We have proving a new energy source. So basically, we share information. We are the breakthrough energy movement. And we are now gifting the world with a whole new energy source for all of humanity. Thank you.
Sound plays a very important role, and one of the lesser known statements or thought patterns of Nikola Tesla that a lot of people seem to miss is that Nikola Tesla said that the earth rings like a bell. It's continuously ringing like a bell. And if you know how to use this primordial source sound frequency of Mother Earth, you'll know how to convert it into an unlimited source of energy. And I believe that's what he really did. What he did with it up at the top of the tower remains a mystery to most of us, and we're all trying to emulate that. But I believe that he was talking about the sound of Gaia, an unlimited free source of energy. And this plays a very important part in all of creation, in all ancient cultures, in all the belief systems. And I believe Tesla used this to do whatever he did to create this free energy that we're all trying to emulate. But what is sound? What is sound? Because we think that sound is just something that travels at a finite speed. Well, that's been busted now because in Tennessee, you studied in Tennessee, didn't you, Brooks? At the Middle State Tennessee University in 2005, there were 3 high school students and 2 undergraduates that proved that sound travels beyond the speed of light. I'm not going to go into that, but that's an interesting thing to contemplate. That's one of the best kept secrets of science and physics. Never made it into the mainstream news bulletins. Sound boils water. This is a guy called Peter Davey in New Zealand. Since 1940, this guy's been boiling water with sound frequency. It's not complicated, because everything has a resonance. Everything in the creation and in physical form has its own fundamental resonant frequencies.
It controls all the frequencies. So if you don't know what the sun's doing, you don't know what frequencies to use. That's why RCA started radio astrology. You have to know what the sun's doing, and the planets tell you what the sun's doing. So RCA gave me the equipment, Sonoma State provided me with the place to do it, and the cosmos provided me with the total planetary alignment. So I was the guy with the equipment and everything right there as the thing happened. I studied the whole event over the couple of years that the whole solar cycle built into this alignment. There's no inside structure.
Is it hollow?
Yeah, there's only a surface. There's nothing inside.
Is the sun actually, do you believe, combusting in on
It's
itself?
not burning anything. There's no fusion in the sun. That's well understood.
Proven.
Yeah, well, there's just not the way to prove that there is any. It's only in the flares that you get fusion. That's why all the X-rays. The flares, the arcs, and the X-rays, and the microwaves, and whatever result of fusion in the arcs. There's no fusion in the sun. They don't know how the sun works.
Why do you, what's special, how does the sun make light?
It's a transformer. Transforms from some other dimension. It's not burning anything. It doesn't have to. It's a converter.
Of what?
I don't know. Nobody knows. But that's what it does. That's the only thing it can do, because that's how everything works.
Transforming from another dimension.
Yeah, you could say it's taking energy from another dimension, counter space.
Hello, my name's Stephen Goodfellow. If you'll bear with me for the next 10 minutes, I'll show you something that will completely change the way you perceive the universe. In this short video, I'll illustrate my outrageous assertion that the sun is a shell of hydrogen with an absolute vacuum interior, a vacuum that induces gravity. Furthermore, I shall support this assertion with the empirical observations that I have collected over the past 30 years. Are you ready? Good. Let's begin. Milk added to a stirred cup of coffee outlines a vortex, which consists of a high-pressure exterior and a low-pressure center. The vortex behaves in a manner identical to that of the planets orbiting the Sun, in that both phenomena obey Kepler's laws of planetary motion. Whether it be clotted cream swishing around a low-pressure center or a planet orbiting our Sun, their behavior is essentially identical. Now, this is the interesting part. The depression in the center of the coffee is a relative absence of matter, producing an effect identical to that of planets and Sun mutually attracted to one another. In other words, one event is brought about by a concentration of mass and the other by an absence thereof. This induced gravitational attraction takes on many related manifestations in nature, some of which we're likely to come across, whether it be in the form of water going down a drain or a whirlpool in a river. On a larger scale, hurricanes, and tornadoes. Although the spiral galaxy's means of propagation remain a mystery, one cannot but be struck by the similarities between these and their more earthly counterparts. Consider the organ with which we hear, the eardrum. Sounds that the inner ear receives and decodes are compressional waves, that is, areas in which there is more air between troughs of less air, or high and low pressures. Through vibration, the ear translates these waves into electrochemical impulses, which are then sent to the brain, and that should be all there is to it, except that the ear actually performs another seemingly unrelated function. The ear has semicircular canals which inform the brain as to your position in relation to our planet's gravitational field. Now that is really, really incredible. One organ performing two seemingly different tasks. One part of the eardrum works with pressure, the other with gravity. Now, if pressure and gravity are two fundamentally distinct and separate forces, should one not expect to find two fundamentally distinct and separate organs to discern these forces? After all, this is the natural order of things. The heart, uniquely suited to pump blood, fulfills its specialized role, and lungs specifically supply oxygen to the blood. So why should the inner ear neatly perform two functions? Could it be that pressure and gravity are two manifestations of the same force? Dictionaries define a vacuum as a space absolutely devoid of matter. And although this seems a reasonable statement, it is not correct. A better definition would be a vacuum is a volume with no space in it. Wherever we look in the universe, absolute vacuums are nowhere to be observed. Now, that is pretty astonishing because for the longest time, space was thought to be an absolute vacuum. When Einstein produced his work on relativity in the early part of the 20th century, he had no way of knowing that space was not a vacuum. We know that light travels upon the fabric of space, but no observation has ever been made of light propagating through an absolute vacuum. Even in the thinnest intergalactic space, any given cubic centimeter is awash in activity. Virtual particles spontaneously come into existence and then blink out again. Radiation permeates this thinnest of space. Whole atoms, unhindered, reach such high velocities that a plethora of them pass through a given cubic centimeter at any given time. Space is a fabric of mass energy, and the laws of pressure are just as relevant in outer space as within the boundaries of our own atmosphere. It is just on a much, much bigger scale. Let us now perform a simple thought model. Let's imagine that I, by calling upon some mysterious power, can force mass energy out of a given volume. Oh, there you go. The first thing you would notice is that it would form into a sphere because of the pressure of the air pushing in equally from all sides. If you were able to observe the sphere, which you can't, and I'll explain why shortly, it would be completely dark. Within this volume, there's no time and there's no temperature. Now, the reason you could not look directly into this absence of mass energy is because the exterior atmosphere would fall on it with such intense pressure that it would glow. And that attraction, that crushing in of the exterior air, would be indistinguishable from gravity. Now, could such objects really exist in reality? Together with solid, liquid and gas, plasma is the fourth state of matter. Our Sun is a large charged plasma ball. Because the Sun is rotating, this creates a dynamo effect which allows the plasma to exist as a single unified magnetic entity. How powerful is this effect? If you look at the shifting structures in the Sun's outer layers, you will see quite plainly that they are not visibly affected by the crushing gravitational attraction of the Sun. This is because the gravitational force is some 10 to the 33 times weaker than the magnetic force. In other words, it only takes a fraction of the plasma's magnetic potential to overcome the gravitational influence of the Sun. Here are three persuasive observations that led me to believe that the Sun propagates in this manner. The first is sunspots. Sunspots are dark depressions in the Sun's photosphere, and the reason they are dark is because we are looking in towards the absolute vacuum of the Sun through this temporary thinning of the solar hydrogen. The second is helioseismology. Scientists have discovered that the Sun rings much like a bell. These oscillations are much easier to propagate through a thin plasma shell rather than through an increasingly dense object. One might compare a bowling ball and a bell. The bell is much more likely to successfully oscillate. The next is angular momentum. If the Sun formed by accretion of interstellar matter, then our Sun ought to be rotating much, much faster than it is. Like a spinning ice skater accelerating by drawing in their arms, the Sun, in the center of the solar system, ought to have the lion's share of angular momentum. But when we look at the system, we find that Jupiter, our largest outer gas planet, has the majority of angular momentum. Jupiter rotates once every 10 hours, whereas the Sun only rotates once every 30 days. Picture a protostar somewhat heavier than Jupiter. The dense pressure of the interior inaugurates nuclear fusion. The dynamo effect created by the rapidly rotating protosun supplies a unifying magnetic field for the plasma. Magnetic repulsion occurs, an outward flow of plasma. The protosun rapidly expands, and in doing so, like a spinning skater putting their arms out, the rotation slows. This inflation of the Sun leaves non-space in its wake. Induced gravitational attraction is brought about, restraining the further outward flow of matter. The opposing forces of magnetic repulsion and induced gravitational attraction brings the solar shell into equilibrium. The Sun's shell of matter is heated under pressure from the magnetic plasma repulsion and the induced gravitational attraction, and now the process repeats. The Sun is in its sustaining cycle. The dense pressure of the Sun's matter crushing in on the non-space heats it, sustaining nuclear fusion, which in turn sustains the plasma. The fuel is hydrogen.
Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this. Goodbye.
Something that looks like a continuous spectre.
At the same time, this observation is registered on radar. While the lights were seen only for a few minutes, the radar readings show the phenomenon apparent for a total of 4 hours.
And we are also very curious about the Hessdalen phenomena, which looks like a burning ball of fire, that it doesn't expand. In a combustion process, things should expand like in a motor in a car, but the phenomena keeps it in the same volume. It doesn't expand at all. So something must be able to hold this phenomena together, like a big magnetical field, like a plasmoid, an magnetic field which entraps plasma and keeps it inside itself. So we are looking for the mechanism that stores the energy, and why this energy source is so extremely powerful in the intensity. If this is a kind of a plasmoid, then we have a localized magnetical field that is able to encompass and keep a huge amount of energy, a plasma, inside a small ball for a long, long time. And this storing mechanism is one of the most interesting things to find out of.
In this section we talk about light and how light is created. Usually in the nuclear physics we recognize electron of an atom, where through a fuzzy light or fuzzy cloud which is rotating around the proton. The light in this case is created through where the plasmatic magnetic field or the magnetosphere of the plasma of electron interacts with plasmatic magnetic field of the proton, and what is left as a residual magnetic field is light. This same process is repeated when you look at the plasmatic magnetic fields when derived from the, for example, the Sun to the plasmatic magnetic field of the Earth. Somewhere away from the Earth on the upper atmosphere, the two plasmatic magnetic fields interact and they slow down because they collide with each other. It's collision. And when they collide, the plasmatic magnetic fields left over, or magnetic fields left over, is light, and that's how light is created, through the interaction of the two plasmatic magnetic fields. When they slow down, we see the slow version of it as light. In reality, when the magnetic field has slowed down to produce light, therefore the light cannot be the ultimate speed that it has been considered up to now in the world of science. The light is part of the overall spectrum of the speed, and in so many ways it's very easy to know how it's created. What we've done through our developments, we have developed reactors which actually create very simple reactors like this. This is exactly spherical. the same as the Earth. The magnetic field created around these reactors are beyond, when they reach beyond the boundary of the reactor, they interact with the plasmatic magnetic field of the Earth and they create light. They create the shining light. In so many ways, now we can explain. If, as people say, they have seen bright lights in the sky, and they see different brightness, strength of brightness, is these systems, if they are, and they do exist, they use gravitational system as what we have discovered and what we have developed. So now they are not unidentified flying objects, but in reality there are systems which they use gravitational magnetic fields, where the plasmatic magnet created within the center of the reactor of the system, in its interaction with the plasmatic magnetic field of the Earth, which is both gravitational magnetic field and the magnetic field of the Earth, that residual interaction of the two fields, which is light, is created. So we see them as bright lights. They come with a different intensity because of how we see the same principle in the universe. We see stars with different intensity. The intensity comes literally from the strength of the plasmatic magnetic field created inside the star, interacting with the hydrogen plasma on the top layer of the star. The plasma's magnetic field of the hydrogen is constant. The only thing which can differ is the strength of the plasmatic magnetic field, which is created within the center of the star. So the star is stronger, they create an intenser light. We see the same thing with our reactors. When we use a stronger magnetic field to create a stronger magnetic field internally, we see a brighter light around them. So we know the answer to UFOs. They're not UFOs, they're gravitational systems. We understand the concept, we understand the technology, we develop the technology, and that's the consequence of what we are and what we do. What we have realized is that, as you see, there is another reactor. Most of the objects in the universe are literally circular, spherical, as you see. We never see in the universe a cylindrical object or any other shape. This is the reason why the magnetic fields entangle, they link up to each other, so they make a spherical shape. And that's how the spherical shape is created. At the same time, we have developed half spherical reactors because we find it much easy to manage for the space technology. So in so many ways, we see half disks flying in the sky, we developed a half disk system, and they work. On the other hand, it comes to one of the most fundamental principles in the world of science. Why light bends near objects like stars, near objects like heavy gravitational centers. Light is magnetically based. And for the first time, as explained earlier, gravitational fields are created through interaction of magnetic fields. So gravitational fields are magnetic field based. So two similar things interact. And that's why we see the bending or the lensing of the light. At the same time, we come to another phenomena of what we call the dark lights or dark spots on the sun. Dark spots on the sun appears very much during every 10.5 years, 11 years cycle of the polarity. When the magnetic field in the center start moving, so there is more interactions with the top layers on the surface, because the magnetic fields of the center of the planet or the star are created through hydrogen atoms, and the surface of the hydrogen atom too, of the plasma of the same, they create a balanced field, or they create what they call the dark spots, which means in reality there is less fragments of light left to create. The same principles applies to the rings of the Saturn, and the same principles about dark matters, which we have explained in the book. On the other hand, what is very interesting is that from now on we have developed, we know the technology, how to make crafts that are mass independent, because now the mass is totally independent of the where the star or where the system is. We know how it works. We hopefully can use this technology for the advantage of humanity. And at the same time, the same principle, the same concepts of having, in reality, understanding that the plasma is made of the matter, the dark matter and antimatter, and the residual magnetic fields within it. Doesn't matter if it's a proton if it's an electron, or if it's a star, the whole thing, once you understand this concept, we can use it for different purposes. For example, we have reported in the past, very recent past, that we have managed to coat diamond structure materials on wires. We've taken this knowledge from the same, what we spoke about, into medical side. We see how MS can be eradicated very rapidly, the understanding and use of this technology, how other illnesses which we have trial tested have been eradicated. Maybe at the end we can conclude in one thing. That is where we started this discussion regarding the fire, burning of the wood, and at the same time we have to depart from this ethos of burning. Now we have learned how to use the magnetic fields of the matters within the structure of a plasma. We do not need to burn. We do not need to destroy. Maybe in the long run we will learn more about how these matters and the interactions will help us to achieve what we were looking for and what we wanted from us. In a way, as the picture of the book says, it's a trinity between the matter, antimatter, dark matter. And this trinity, if it's understood and utilized properly, will come to a point that we can have as much energy as we need, we can produce as much food as we need without destroying the environment. And at the same time, maybe it's a time to say, in understanding the new construction of the plasmas, in the construction of the universe, there will be never an end to the universe, because these magnetic fields forever interact. Doesn't matter what the strength they are, they produce new conditions, new environments. So I hope we have opened a new insight into the world of science, and at the same time we have developed technologies which proves our concept and what we have developed. Thank you very much.
The Apollo 12 seismic experiment. Apollo 12 placed the first seismometer on an alien world. NASA did not expect many moonquakes. They expected the moon to be seismically dead. To ensure some kind of seismic results, they deliberately crashed part of a rocket into the moon. When they did this, the results astounded them. The moon's behavior was quite unexpected. It rang like a bell for almost an hour. Quotes from the scientists of the time are quite interesting. Science News, in its 1970 yearbook, went on to suggest that maybe the moon is hollow. It stated the following: during the first day or two after the event, many researchers were reluctant even to try to devise a lunar model that would fit the strange phenomenon. Some such models would have made for a rather bizarre moon.
You have to understand that neutrons work as an entity, like any other entity in the universe. So when the political scientists don't understand it, they give it a different name and they call it up quarks and down quarks. But in reality, the plasma of a neutron consists of a center source, and where that field from the center source reduces in a strength that becomes visible to us as a human being, that becomes the size of the plasma of the neutron.
Okay.
So if that is too hard to understand, the easiest way is if you take the plasma of a solar system, you have a sun in the center which radiates its fields outward, and then somewhere, let's say around Earth, when this material becomes tangible, or the magnetic field in the strength becomes tangible to us, it becomes the part of the Earth structure. So every plasma has a source, but we choose different names for this source. In the plasma of electron, we call it antimatter. In the plasma of proton, we call it antimatter. In the plasma of the solar system, we call the same source the sun or the star. And in a bigger scale in the galaxies than in the universe, the bigger size, we call them black holes. So black holes, the sun, the antimatter is the same. It's just three different names for calling the source of the magnetic field. So when you have magnetic fields, they interact, and when magnetic fields interact, you have attraction or repulsion. The attraction between two magnetic fields, we call it gravitation, and the repulsion is what we call magnetic field of the, or atmosphere of the entity. So then you understand simply gravity is exactly the same thing as the magnetic field, what creates atmosphere. And in turn, you find out you cannot have a gravitational field without the magnetic field or atmosphere. Then the rest is playing the same game in different scales.
You know, I really like that model, actually. A lot of what Einstein had said about gravity was based on his work with studying magnetic fields, and I've always felt like there was a definite connection. And I think that contemporary research definitely holds that there's a connection between magnetic fields.
It's the same thing. If it's very hard to understand, take two pieces of magnet together. Put two similar poles together, facing each other, you find out the two magnets repulse each other. They keep a distance. And where the distance is comfortable, this is the position where the magnet sits. That's the gap. So this is the atmosphere. This is where you cannot enter. This is the atmosphere of the two magnets. Then if you take one north and one south facing each other, they attract each other. So then you find out that repulsion and gravity is the interaction between two fields. So if it's similar, you attract. If it's dissimilar, you repulse. If it's dissimilar, you attract. If it's too hard to understand, always say it's very easy. Call what we call North Pole the exit, and call the South Pole entry. Then it solves all the problems for you. Doesn't matter you put a 1 meter magnet, 10 meter magnets, and a plasma of a magnet. The fields come out and they have to go back into the same tunnel. So if you have two magnets, similar poles, you have repulsion. You put two plasma together, it's the same principle, there is no difference. So you have a plasma of the proton of the body, and you have a plasma of the Earth magnetic and gravitational field, then you find out that's why us humans stand at the level of where we are, and how, according to which height from this center we live, we have different structures in our body. We are shorter, we are taller, we are longer, we have different eye shapes.
So it's very simple. Once you understand the concept of gravity and magnetic field are created by the same materials in the same position, then the secret of gravity is resolved.
Now, if it's okay to ask, how is it with gravity? How are you able to find the second pole to be able to repel? Because
the second pole is exactly where the first pole is, because you have the atmosphere. It's in the same place.
Oh, okay.
So the same place, but you don't find that all the material, or all the plasmas, or all the fields are all the time in the same position. Some are north positions to south, and some are south position to south, some are north position to north. So you have a plasma. Plasma is dynamic. So you find a collection of the fields which the interaction between the what's called repulsion and attraction then leads to creation of mass and magnetosphere of the system. That's why the mass is always constant, because it's the balance between the two fields which are created as byproduct of gravity and the magnetic field or magnetosphere of this entity.
Well, now with the MagGrav device, then with the technology you've developed, can you describe for me how you're coupling to the gravitational field of the Earth in order to repel it?
No, we need to couple. You don't need to couple. Simply, if it's too hard to understand, always go on a bigger scale. The bigger scale, take the sun and take the Earth. The sun produces gravitational and magnetic field at the same time. The Earth produces gravitational and magnetic field at the same time. Where these four forces are in balance is where the Earth positions itself. So our position is dependent on the gravitational magnetic field of the Earth in respect to gravitational magnetic field of the sun. So where the four forces find balance, this is the position we are. So now we created a system that it creates both gravitational magnetic field. So when our gravitational magnetic field of our system finds its balance in respect to the Earth, this is where our system positions itself.
Okay.
Positioning doesn't come out of rocket propulsion. NASA is finished. NASA is fighting literally fingers, toes, and their teeth to lock Keshe Foundation down, that the truth doesn't come out, that they can carry on with the propulsion business. We know in NASA there is an instruction, nobody can speak to Keshe Foundation. We know in NASA, any of the management who speaks to Keshe Foundation, they are face sucking. We know in NASA, if you are working with NASA, you just put Keshe Foundation, there is no access, they won't let you, because the simplicity is they would like to keep it with what I call the bird and a Chinese firework, what we call the shuttle system and the Chinese firework. And now we look at the way the universe works. And that's the difference. They are not wrong, we are not wrong, but it's going the path in two different ways.
Yeah, a different perspective on things. Well, now with the device that you've constructed, then, so are you using like magnetic coils to generate the field?
No. These are plasma. They're a plasma technologist.
Oh, okay. And this would be similar to the reactor that you've developed, then, in some ways.
We've made a copy of we have made a system copy of all the dynamic entities, like a plasma of a proton, plasma of the Earth, plasma of the Sun, plasma of the solar system, and plasma of the universe. In the universe, we don't see any wings, and we don't see any rocket propulsion or Chinese firework. But all the planets, all the solar system have been moving around for millions of years by positioning and magnetic field interaction between different entities that it dictates the speed and position in respect to the rest. So up to now we followed, as I said, we tried to copy the birds, not the systems. We made copies of the working of the universe.
Good morning, folks. If you're watching half asleep, time to wake up. How about this? It's from our electricity and plasma workshop in Georgia run by Billy Yelverton, Yelverton's lab. When the outstretching energies finally meet one another, there is a flash and briefly sustained current. This is, of course, important because we set it up to be like the ground and ionosphere in a lightning discharge and just waited for someone with a millisecond camera to catch Earth doing the same thing. Perhaps you'd also remember Kong Pop's talks from Observing the Frontier in Pittsburgh, including the Chladni plate showing resonance dictation of planetary positions, and including these images, except I didn't pull them from his talk. I pulled them from a brand new paper, which suggests exactly what the observers have been saying for a while now. A standing wave resonance caused by the central sun and its previous protostar dictate where the planets will form. In case you haven't noticed, the electric and wave-driven hypotheses for how this universe works are far simpler and require much less invented math than our current paradigm. Both Yelverton's lab and Kong Pop's talks, including all the other talks from Pittsburgh, can be found at suspiciousobservers.org. Website members just click premium and both of those sections are in the top 4 list. It is just $4 per month to become a member, and apparently we're a couple years ahead of the curve. That's we, as in all 250,000 observers. Got pressure and radar forecast followed by shots of our star to close. It's 4:20 a.m. in the Valley of the Sun. Eyes open, no fear. Be safe, everyone.
We can look at and we can see these self-organizing forms throughout. We can see it in the cross-section of an orange, the cross-section of an apple. We can see it in the dynamic nature of a tornado. We can see it in the magnetic field around the Earth, a similar magnetic field around an individual. We can see it in the structure of an entire whirlpool galaxy. We can see it in the structure of a small atom. At every scale, throughout its entire history, the universe has one single project. It's growing toruses.
That's the appropriate description even for the atmosphere of our planet. The weather goes from the North Pole down to the equator and then back up, from the South Pole up to the equator and then back down. Even the dynamics on the surface of the sun are very similar.
So we invested in wind, we invested in solar, we invested in biomass. We're all about increasing energy efficiency and finding new, renewable, clean sources of energy. We don't yet have the technological breakthroughs that can completely replace fossil fuels. Unless somebody here invents something tomorrow, which would be very helpful. And if you have it, let me know.
With all due respect, Mr. President, this is me letting you know. I'm here representing the Vortex-based mathematics project, which was founded by my teacher, Marco Rodin. Nearly 40 years ago, Marco discovered an unknown mathematical language inherent to nature. Now I found the key of how to model it in 3-dimensional space. The importance of this discovery cannot be underestimated. With it, I believe we can create inexhaustible clean energy, produce unlimited food, end all diseases, travel anywhere in the universe, build the ultimate supercomputer, and obsolete all existing technology. How is it possible that we make such outrageous claims? It's because we have the secret that connects all the world's technologies into one: numbers. A living language, a jigsaw puzzle that when pieced together no longer forms an approximation or a rendition of reality. Numbers are reality, neither imaginary, nor irrational, nor arbitrary. Numbers are actually a waveform that folds out into a 3D shape, defining space and time literally. The shape of a torus, nature's original donut, many believe may hold the key to creating a clean and sustainable environment for future generations. We can tap what has been referred to as the 0-point energy, sometimes referred to as free energy, and already the evidence and traces of that exist in very simple home-built technology.
This technology has been around for centuries.
In this demonstration, we're using a 12-volt battery which feeds into a simple circuit that creates a sound frequency. That sound frequency is then fed into the coil, and then it comes out in the form of usable light. Now the important thing here is that we're able to light 98 LEDs at a fraction of the energy consumption that it would normally take to light around 8 LEDs. So we're getting 90 more LEDs for less energy consumption. We stumbled upon the Vortex math of Randy Powell and Marco Rodin and began to expand on their concepts.
This technology is not to be privatized or owned by any individual or corporation, but is instead our desire to open source it to the public, and in the process to make a film documenting the construction, the development, and the investigation of both the math and the technology. The problem is not the lack of a collective desire for a positive future, but the lack of a collective vehicle for positive actions. Humanity doesn't have to have a dark future, and it's not going anywhere that we don't steer it. We have a technology in our hands that can boom the market of alternative energy, solar cells, and electric vehicles, and change our world forever. We have already achieved the impossible, but now we need your help to make the impossible an everyday experience. What we have is the grand unified field theory. With it, you can create inexhaustible free energy, end all diseases, produce unlimited food, travel anywhere in the universe, build the ultimate supercomputer, artificial intelligence, and obsolete all existing technology. And with it, you can do all the functions of all the branches of math instantly. It displays a perfect spin symmetry of numbers forming mirror images just like our two hands, a feat that's baffled countless scientists and mathematicians. When you look at this symbol, you immediately see it's composed of two aspects. One is this lazy 8, or the infinity symbol, and the other is the red pyramid at the top. The infinity symbol is the equation for the physical world we live in. It's a circuit or a pathway of motion. 6 numbers that form a hexagon. Thus, such diverse phenomena as light polarizing, beehives, Saturn's North Pole, and snowflakes are all versions of this hexagon. These shapes form pathways for any matter in motion, which is never straight, but always at an angle. Nothing in the physical world ever moves in a straight line, not a bullet shooting, not lightning coming down out of the sky. Everything is a coil, even a photon coming from a distant star, proving relativity exists. Our body is called this mortal coil. Our DNA is a coil, and it's no coincidence that it matches our equation perfectly. It makes us into a vortex machine that sucks things in at the top and shoots them out at the bottom.
Our bodies are toroidal systems, our planet is a toroidal system, and all vortex energy works in the same fashion.
The center of electricity is magnetism. At the center of magnetism is a flux. It's a higher dimensional energy known by many names such as dark energy, tachyons, monopoles, gravitons. We call it etheron energy. It's the energy that's keeping us conscious and alive, and it's not a static or stationary energy. It's a pulse, it's a surge, it's the beating heart of all existence. It's the ultimate fundamental particle in the universe, the God particle, and I know how to harness it. This energy is the source of all time, motion, and vibration. It's the only thing that comes from the whole, or the zero, the center of the cyclone. It emanates linearly in all directions, penetrating everything without any resistance. It cannot be shielded. As it penetrates, it leaves a grain. It shows you how things move, how they stick together or come apart. It animates everything. It's the source of the non-decaying spin of the electron. If you combine it with a coil, you get a perfect mathematical vortex consisting of a positive electromagnetic energy radiating out and a negative backdraft counter space, which is the same as gravity. It allows for contraction. Etherons are literally the glue that holds the universe together. Einstein called it an inertia ether. Ultimately, when this is arrayed in true 3D shape, which is what I discovered, it forms a shape commonly known as a torus or a donut. This experiment you're going to watch while I finish my talk, I want you to keep in mind when you're watching this magnet spinning around, there's no energy going into this coil. It's totally turned off. And I'll continue. Your blood cells are a torus. DNA is a torus. Magnetic fields, galaxies, all toruses. It's a one-way living systemic electrical machine, a self-sustaining jet. You might say a flying saucer. I found the way to calculate this torus in a perfect 3D, 4D, and higher mathematical hologram that can be scaled up and down to infinity, and which we now call the Abha torus. Or sometimes we refer to it by Marco's name, which is the flux thruster, atom pulsar, electrical venturi, space-time implosion field generator coil. And with it, it's possible to create a localized space-time implosion, a controlled desktop black hole. That magnet's still spinning. There's no energy in the coil. This is the final technology, the philosopher's stone, a reactionless drive unaffected by any weight that it carries. It's a true model of an atom, and with it I have the key to the periodic table, which a professor from the University of North Carolina told me could be the greatest scientific discovery of all time. We can, for the first time, cross from one science to another, unbroken, whether it's subatomic physics, periodic table, computer science, DNA. Remember, I said cure all diseases, artificial intelligence, all the result of ether-on flux fields. And so simply put, this torus does it all. It's a blueprint for a perfectly efficient magnetic field generating coil, a spaceship, a surgical tool, a supercomputer, and even a high-fidelity speaker all in one. Are such things possible? Frankly, yes, they are, and my team is ready to develop them at any time. What you see here was just from the most primitive approximation of my work. But the truth and reality of our project is it suffered from a tremendous lack of attention. It has been peer-reviewed by some of the best names in science, but because of our unwillingness to sell it out for private interests, it remains in the hands of exhausted volunteers like myself. Our goal is to create a grassroots energy and technology revolution by turning this information, this knowledge over to the public in an open source project. Science museum exhibits for kids, a simple book, a simple DVD, that's all we're looking to do. And by that, we want to turn it into the hands of the people to produce and save the whole world. Thank you very much.
Welcome to Space News from the Electric Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at thunderbolts.info. At the recent Thunderbolts Project Conference, EU 2015, Paths of Discovery, Professor Donald Scott presented new, groundbreaking evidence of the electromagnetic connection between the Earth and the Sun. The Electric Universe theory states that the Sun is in essence an electrical discharge phenomenon, powered by electric currents flowing along the arm of the galaxy. Electrical circuitry connects the Sun and all planets, including the Earth, driving climate, weather, and Earth's auroras. The telltale sign of Birkeland currents at the poles of planets is counter-rotational motions in atmospheric phenomena. Today, Dr. Scott discusses the new visual evidence that Birkeland currents from the Sun are the cause of Earth's auroras.
The Earth-Sun connection, which of course is, I think, the primary basic foundational idea of the electric universe, at least historically, that this marvelous investigator, Norwegian investigator, Christian Birkeland, literally put his life in danger to go out on the north slopes of Norway in the Norwegian winter and take measurements out there. His idea was, of course, that the aurora were caused electrically. You have to remember that when he did this, it was around 1902, 1903, I think. The idea of an electron had just been postulated 2 or 3 years earlier. So it was not a very, ubiquitous idea that these electrons were flying around. And Birkeland was roundly chastised by the astronomical community. No, that's ridiculous. No, none of these corpuscles, I guess Birkeland called them. And also other investigators called them corpuscles as well. But they could never make it to hold 93 million miles from the sun to the Earth. It's a ludicrous idea. And of course, later on, to make the long story short, after World War II, when we sent rockets up into the upper atmosphere, we found out indeed that's exactly what was going on. And Sidney Chapman, the prime, antagonist of Birkeland, was certainly shown to be all wet. So from there, it went on. I got into the act very late, just a few years ago. My contribution really was I completed the derivation of a mathematical, physical model of a Birkeland current. What would this thing look like? And NASA now calls them magnetic flux ropes. And actually, Hannes Alfvén was the guy who coined that phrase. I don't really like it very much because it kind of obfuscates the idea that it's electrical. All these folks nowadays, NASA and the professional astronomers, they're okay with the word magnetic. That's fine. They kind of pull that out of the bottle as like a genie. And if there's something they don't understand, it's due to a magnetic field. You hear ludicrous things like, there was a lump of magnetic field that would cause that. A lump of magnet? You've got to be kidding. Well, anyway, they don't still like to use the word electric, although they're coming around even on that one. But anyway, this model that I derived, I finished the derivation of it. The derivation was really started by a fellow by the name of Lundquist in 1950. but it was in his paper, it was very incomplete. Coefficients were not evaluated, and the structure that those equations implied was not discussed. And anyway, one of the primary properties of that model is this idea of counter-rotation. If you think about a steel rod, then you surround it with a pipe, a hollow pipe, and then surround that pipe with a bigger pipe, and then yet surround that whole thing with a bigger pipe, and keep on doing this for a number of, what should I say, pipes, a number of radii, and have each one of those pipes, if you pick up one of the pipes, the pipe above it and the pipe below it would be going in the opposite rotational direction from its rotation. So that's what I mean by counter-rotation. Sort of, if anybody's familiar with counter-rotating propellers on a ship, that's exactly the way the tail shafts would work. But anyway, that's what my model at least came out with, is that it should be counter-rotation. And most people, well, anybody who's interested in the electric universe, I think, realizes that about one and a half conferences ago, I presented I thought a mind-blowing video, a NASA video, showing exactly that happening at the North Pole of Saturn. One of the things that kind of bugs me a little bit is that astronomers are reluctantly agreeable to talking about Birkeland currents when it comes to the Earth. Even there, they're trying to call them by some different names. I read an article the other day. What in the world is this guy talking about? Oh, he's talking about a Birkeland current. He didn't call it that. I think maybe they are a little bit ashamed of the shabby treatment that Birkeland got from professional astronomers. But anyway, this video from NASA was just mind-blowing, I think. And at this past conference, just last week's conference, I was fortunate enough to find another NASA video, this time of the planet Jupiter, everybody's big brother planet there. And sure enough, just blatantly, there was these counter-rotating cylindrical, when you look at them, down at them at the North Pole of Jupiter, they're circular, of course, and they were traveling in opposite directions. And I sat there amazed when I first saw the video, and actually counted, or tried to count, the number of these counter-rotating concentric cylinders. And I got up to 15 before I ran out of steam. And when you have 15 different counter-rotating cylinders, I mean, it's a lot of counter-rotation. And then I thought about, well, what about the Earth? I mean, everybody knows that the Birkeland currents do power the Earth's aurora. Is there any evidence of counter-rotation there? So I guess I prowled the internet, and I came upon several people who had tried to video the aurora. Most of them didn't know what they were looking for. Most everybody who's looked at it says, oh, isn't it beautiful? It's just marvelous. Oh, it's gorgeous. Unlike me, they were not looking necessarily for evidence of counter-rotation of these hollow cylinders, until I came upon one Polish fellow, I guess at least by ethnicity. His name is, I think, Maciek Winiarczyk, and he had a fantastically high-resolution video camera, placed it on a very firm tripod on the north tip of Scotland. He took this video, and I just marveled at it. And if you ask my opinion, does it show counter-rotation? I would quickly answer, you betcha. Especially right at the opening of that video and in the closing scenes, it's undeniable, in my opinion, in this singularity, in my one man's opinion, it is obvious that there is counter-rotation going on there. There's also evidence, of course, that they do occur on, possibly at least on Neptune and Uranus. Not particularly so on Mercury for several reasons. One, what's required is to have the planet have a reasonable geomagnetic field like Earth does. Jupiter has one in spades, so that's why I think of all the planets, the Jupiter is most obviously on the receiving end of a Birkeland current.
For continuous updates on space news from the electric universe, stay tuned to thunderbolts.info. Welcome to Space News from the Electric Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at thunderbolts.info. Scientists in the United Kingdom have reported findings that could change our understanding of lightning. Researchers at the University of Reading's Department of Meteorology have discovered a link between charged particles from the Sun and increased lightning on Earth. According to an article on the Institute of Physics website, the team found a substantial and significant increase in lightning rates across Europe for up to 40 days after the arrival of high-speed solar winds. The article also states, although the exact mechanism that causes these changes remains unknown, the researchers proposed that the electrical properties of the air are somehow altered as the incoming charged particles from the solar wind collide with the atmosphere. However, rather than resulting from mechanical collisions, the electric universe theory states that lightning on Earth and other planets indicates an electrical circuitry between the planets and the Sun.
Back in 2002, I wrote on my website in an article called "The Balloon Goes Up Over Lightning." In August 2001, a high-altitude balloon was sent aloft to ride far above the great storms of the Midwest USA. Researchers had sent the balloon, like a dark rider out of Tolkien, riding into the moonless night seeking sprites, gnomes, and the ring of the elves. Professor Edgar Bering, a physicist at the University of Houston in Texas, was trying to understand sprites, those strange phenomena, lightning discharges above thunderstorms that stretch upwards to the ionosphere. So he sent a balloon up above storms to try and find out what was going on. The biggest surprise from that experiment was that the electric charge to produce the sprites and the lightning below in the thunderstorms was already there. It wasn't generated from below. So in other words, the electricity was coming from space. So it's no surprise that this recent study, which found a correlation between energetic streams of particles from the Sun and an increase in lightning, was found, because this fits with the electric universe model, that the energy for lightning storms comes from the same circuit that actually powers the Sun. Now, Venus is closer to the Sun than the Earth is, and it was found to have lightning, but this was a surprise because, as one side has said, you don't expect lightning in smog because Venus doesn't have water clouds like the Earth does. So the fact that Venus also had lightning shows that it is something that's coming from beyond the planet, from the Sun. And it's also known that Venus is wrapped in these so-called magnetic ropes, but the magnetic ropes themselves are merely euphemisms for Birkeland currents, electric currents from the Sun wrapping itself around Venus, and also wrapping very closely to the ionosphere of Venus, which means that there is quite strong coupling. When we go into the outer solar system, we find some of the most powerful storms ever seen in the solar system on Jupiter and on Saturn. The lightning on Saturn is up to 1,000 to 10,000 times more powerful than that on Earth. Of course, this is attributed to water clouds somewhere deep in the atmosphere, but the intensity and the concentration of the power, particularly on the great storm on Saturn of a few years ago, isn't explained by just water clouds moving up and down in the atmosphere, convecting and generating an electric current. Because even on Earth, this mechanism has been found to be totally inadequate to explain the electric fields required to generate a lightning stroke. Something else is needed. What's more, the energy that drives the currents up and down in a storm cloud is supposed to be solar heat energy. But the clouds themselves turn off that heat energy to a large extent, and so it begs the question of cause and effect. It's known that lightning, for instance, ejects matter upwards along the lightning channel, and electric discharges can be in the form rather like an air ionizer and cause a wind. So these vertical winds are much more easily explained as being one more effect of the electricity which is already existing in the atmosphere from the Sun, and which forms lightning when you get clouds, because clouds form a kind of intermediary between the ionosphere and the ground on the Earth. They sit close, fairly close to the Earth in relation to the ionosphere, which is some 90 or 100 kilometres above the clouds. So if we didn't have clouds, we might suffer the kind of superbolts, as they were called, that Venus suffers, and also Mars with its huge electrical dust storms, which stretch from the ground to heights higher than Mount Everest. All of these things are explained simply from the electrical point of view, but they are a problem, they are a conundrum. They're unexplained by the present view of electrically sterile planets and an electrically sterile solar system.
This latest discovery only underscores one of the many unresolved mysteries in solar physics, the acceleration of the solar wind as it moves away from the sun.
Of course, the problem of lightning on Earth ties back to the problem of explaining how particles in the solar wind are accelerated as they move away from the sun. In other words, they defy the gravitational force of the sun and accelerate out beyond the planets. The same mechanism is involved in the production of lightning as in the acceleration of the solar wind. It's as simple as that. And the very fact that there are magnetic fields associated with the solar wind indicates that the charged particles do form electric currents, because you do not get magnetic fields without an electric current. None of this features in any of this theorizing, which tends to turn towards misconceptions like magnetic reconnection and so on. One of the other aspects is too that it's expected that cosmic rays somehow contribute to lightning. But when the sun is more active, the cosmic ray count goes down. And yet here we have the high activity of a CME or an outburst from the sun arriving at the Earth. The cosmic ray rate goes down, but the lightning rate goes up. So it shows that this idea that cosmic rays contribute to lightning production on Earth is also maybe not a direct cause and effect.
In this series, Space News from the Electric Universe, we have documented many dozens of recent discoveries that challenge the consensus theories of the space sciences. However, institutional science and its proponents in popular media continue to move forward as if nothing has changed.
Establishment science has gotten into the habit of ignoring, burying, or suppressing what has now become astonishing amounts of anomalous evidence. Some of this evidence challenges the very foundations of the accepted scientific worldview, and none of it is taught in universities or covered by textbooks. Mention any of it to a mainstream scientist and odds are you will be dismissed as a crank, or worse, a crackpot. The conclusion is sobering. Some of what passes for scientific fact these days is little more than a social construct. What is true and what is not is determined by the scientific prestige of the claimant, the predilections of journal editors and referees, and by economic interests. A scientist who challenges the status quo becomes a persona non grata, banned from publication in journals and speaking on conferences, defunded, marginalized.
For continuous updates on space news from the Electric Universe, stay tuned to thunderbolts.info.
The main portion of this presentation is going to be about the seismology of a hollow planet. But before we get into that, I will be giving you some background information about the hollow Earth theory. While I am speaking, I will be putting up slides showing various diagrams and information contained in my book. The slides you will see prior to the seismology presentation will not necessarily relate to the things I am talking about. It is merely to give you an idea of some of the photographs and diagrams in my book. There is simply too much for us to discuss in this hour. So the main part of this presentation will only cover one chapter out of the 19 chapters of my book. Let me tell you how I first became interested in the hollow Earth theory. Back in the 1970s, two scientists from the Soviet Academy of Sciences proposed a theory that the moon might be hollow. An American author by the name of Don Wilson then wrote a book based on this idea. It was called Our Mysterious Spaceship Moon. One of the more interesting things mentioned in that book was the Apollo 12 seismic experiment. Apollo 12 placed the first seismometer on an alien world. NASA did not expect many moonquakes. They expected the moon to be seismically dead. To ensure some kind of seismic results, they deliberately crashed part of a rocket into the moon. When they did this, the results astounded them. The moon's behavior was quite unexpected. It rang like a bell for almost an hour. Quotes from the scientists of the time are quite interesting. Science News, in its 1970 yearbook, went on to suggest that maybe the moon is hollow. It stated the following: during the first day or two after the event, many researchers were reluctant even to try to devise a lunar model that would fit the strange phenomenon. Some such models would have made for a rather bizarre moon, such as a hollow titanium ball, said Captain Shearer, which is highly unlikely. Two Russian scientists then wrote a paper entitled, "Is the Moon the Creation of Intelligence?" It was published in the Russian journal Sputnik. They suggested the moon had been created by aliens and put into orbit around the Earth. I never forgot the hollow moon theory. It made me open to the idea that the Earth or other planets might also be hollow. My interest in the hollow Earth theory only began in the early 1990s, when internet came to South Africa, and I started discussing the idea with Americans. I then learnt of another book, this time by an American named Marshall Gardner. He revived the hollow Earth idea in 1913. He wasn't a scientist. Instead, he seemed to be something of an inventor and perhaps even an engineer. He wrote a book entitled A Journey to the Earth's Interior. Marshall Gardner wrote a great deal about the Arctic regions and the idea that there was a gigantic hole covering all of the Arctic, which led into the Earth's interior. He tried to show that hot air came from the north instead of cold air. He also cited evidence of animals which traveled north for winter instead of south. I am by profession a software developer and an IT consultant. I have been in IT for over 20 years. There is nothing which tests one's own logic as much as a computer. The slightest oversight on your part can cause serious problems. One thing which computers taught me was that small things can have big ramifications. As I thought about the hollow Earth idea, it became apparent to me that the slightest oversight by scientists could have a radical effect upon their ideas about the inner Earth. Many books have been written about the hollow Earth, and the vast majority of them are rubbish. I realized that nobody had applied serious thought to the subject since Marshall Gardner. IT often borrows on ideas and concepts used by engineers. One of these concepts is a feasibility study. I decided to do my own feasibility study on the hollow planet idea to see if it had any merits. My approach was the following. I knew there were many uncomfortable scientific facts which did not fit current theories properly. I wondered if some of these facts could be related to the hollow Earth theory. So I set out to find all the facts I could which did not fit current theories, and to see which, if any, could be tied back to the hollow Earth theory. I wanted to see if the hollow Earth theory could explain some things better than the solid Earth theory. The father of the hollow Earth theory is none other than Sir Edmund Halley. He was one of the greatest astronomers and scientists of his time. He discovered Halley's Comet. He was the first man to propose that the Earth might be hollow. He studied the motion of the Earth's magnetic field. In those days, they did not know much about magnetism. He suggested that maybe there were some magnetized objects moving around inside the Earth, which were causing the Earth's magnetic field to move. He came up with the theory of concentric spheres. He imagined there were several spheres inside the Earth, and each of these was magnetized. He thought they were rotating at different speeds, thereby causing the Earth's magnetic field to move. When there was a great aurora in England, he suggested that it was caused by a luminous atmosphere which was inside the Earth and which was leaking out. He suggested that there was a great hole in the Arctic that led into the interior of the Earth. The hollow Earth theory has survived for centuries, egged on by odd people. It is said that Leonhard Euler, the greatest mathematician of all time, also became interested in the idea. He supposedly did not think the idea of several spheres was practical. So he simplified it into a single shell with a large cavity inside it. Euler was a prolific writer, and most of his texts are in Russia. A great deal of his writings have never been translated into English. Sadly, I could not find any of his writings on the hollow Earth, even though there are rumors that he played a major role in the development of the idea. Many works of fiction have been written about the hollow Earth. The most famous of them is Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne. Scientists are convinced planets cannot be hollow. This is because of the theory of gravity. In astronomy, the masses of all the planets are relative. So astronomers will tell you that planets are not hollow because when they compare the mass of one planet to another, they find them to have a pretty similar density. Because scientists are convinced the Earth itself is hollow, because scientists are convinced the Earth is solid, they then reach the conclusion that all the planets must be solid. However, if the Earth were hollow, then it would follow that all the planets are hollow. That is an important realization which I came to, that either all the planets are solid or all are hollow. If some were solid and others were hollow, then astronomers would have noticed this a long time ago. You might wonder how come they are convinced the Earth is solid. This comes from the Cavendish balance experiment. The Cavendish balance is a device that measures the attraction between two lead balls. Scientists then take these results and extrapolate them to find the mass of the Earth. This gives them a mass of 6.6 trillion tons. Take note that this is the one and only method we have of estimating the Earth's mass. There is no method of cross-checking these results. The problem with the Cavendish balance experiment is that it is based on a number of assumptions. The lead balls, for example, are electrically neutral. If there is any difference between the planets and those lead balls, then the results of the experiment will be meaningless. For example, the Earth contains electrical currents inside of it up to 1 billion amps. If electricity were to affect the way gravity works, then it would nullify the results of the Cavendish balance experiment. Consider too that in nature, static electricity has an attractive force which is incredibly strong compared to gravity. It is assumed that planets are electrically neutral, and that static electricity is not a factor to be considered. If any of these assumptions are invalid, then the Cavendish experiment is worthless. In my book, I discuss a great many issues relating to gravity, which we will not go into now. But gravity is not as cut and dried as you may think. There are a great many technical issues to do with gravity that have yet to be solved. Dr. Tom Van Flandern, a professional astronomer in the USA, pointed out that even such things as the speed of gravity are unknown. There is no atomic level theory of gravity which works. We have hardly advanced our knowledge of gravity since Newton's time. One thing I discovered in my feasibility study was that a scientist in the 1960s, Dr. Saxel, mentioned he had a discussion with Albert Einstein. Einstein told him he was convinced that electricity and gravity are interrelated. Dr. Saxel went on to do a number of experiments with electrically charged pendulums to see if Einstein's ideas were correct. He got some very strange results with his electrical pendulums. Nowadays, scientists deny the possibility that electricity may affect gravity. However, if it does, then their estimates of the mass of the Earth will be completely wrong. We know there are electrical currents inside the Earth. Calculations based on the Earth's magnetic field show that deep inside the Earth there must be electrical currents of up to 1 billion amps. If these currents affect gravity, then the Earth may weigh much more or much less than the Cavendish balance experiment shows. I now want to focus on seismology. I have done something that nobody has ever done before. I dug into the science of seismology to see if it could provide clues as to whether planets could be hollow. What I am about to show you is something which I wish someone would put on a documentary or on a TV program. I feel it is important for people to see this. Let me explain the principles on which seismology is based. Firstly, seismic waves are the main means we have of knowing what lies inside the Earth. Earthquakes generate seismic waves. These waves travel throughout the Earth. The only place we can measure these waves is here on the surface of the Earth. We have instruments which measure the various vertical and horizontal movements of these waves. Seismology is based on the mathematical interpretation of seismic waves. Scientists first create various solid Earth models of what might be inside the Earth, and then they use this to interpret their seismic results. Scientists never consider the possibility that the Earth might be hollow. The Cavendish balance experiment has convinced them completely that the Earth is solid. And so all their analysis of seismic waves is done on the assumption that seismic waves are traveling through a solid planet. The Cavendish balance experiment shows them that a mass of X has an attraction of Y. When you drop an object on the surface of the Earth, it falls with an acceleration of 9.8 meters per second. By applying the results of the Cavendish balance experiment, they conclude that the Earth has a mass of 6.6 trillion tons. Their next problem is how to fit this mass inside the Earth, which has a diameter of 7,900 miles. They have found that they have to assume a number of solid spheres exist inside the Earth. As you go deeper, each of these spheres is denser than the one above it. The density of the Earth on the surface is 2.7 times that of water. However, according to the Cavendish balance experiment, the average density of the Earth must be about 5.5 times that of water. Scientists have found a way of fitting this mass inside a sphere the size of the Earth. Over the years, they have come up with a model consisting of 3 spheres. The outermost sphere is the mantle. Then inside it is the outer core, and right at the center of the Earth is the inner core. When they analyze seismic waves, they analyze them in accordance with this model. I wanted to see if a hollow Earth seismic model could make sense. Theoretically, a hollow Earth should not make any seismic sense at all. Let me explain why. Here is a diagram showing the paths of seismic waves through the solid Earth. In the diagram, seismic waves travel from the source of an earthquake, on the left here, through the Earth at various angles, and they reach the other side. If you were to propose that a planet only has a shell with a thickness of 1,000 miles or less, you would have a problem. Seismic waves only travel through solid matter. If there were a giant cavity in the center of the Earth, the waves would not be able to travel through it. They would not be able to reach the other side of the Earth, as you can see there. In this diagram, you can see the seismic ray paths, shown as red lines, moving away from an earthquake source. Note how the huge cavity in this traditional hollow Earth model would block out all the P waves from reaching the other side of the Earth. So clearly, this type of approach does not fit the known scientific facts, and we must discard it. Take a look at this diagram. It shows the ray paths of seismic waves. The key thing you must take note of is that seismic waves travel through every part of the Earth. This is a very important fact to remember. Often when people hear about the hollow Earth theory, the first question they ask me is, where does lava come from? The completely false impression schools have created in everyone's minds is that the Earth is a red-hot ball of lava. They then imagine that lava from volcanoes comes from the center of the Earth. Ask any geologist or seismologist if this is true, and they will tell you it is not so. Standard geology and seismology texts tell a different story. Scientists know that most lava is slightly radioactive, and they believe it is produced either by decaying radium or through stresses in the crust. Lava is created by heat generated within the crust of the Earth. The crust of the Earth is thought to be no more than 20 miles thick, although, to be honest, nobody has ever actually penetrated the crust, so we do not know what lies beneath it. Scientists will tell you that lava is a crustal phenomenon, and all lava comes from no deeper than 20 miles. If the Earth were an ocean of molten lava, then it would actually be subject to tidal pressures, and the continents would be broken to pieces as the Earth rotated. Scientists say the Earth is actually composed of solid rock for the most part. As you go deeper, the pressures are supposed to be so great that the rock actually flows from extreme pressure. But nowhere in modern geology or seismology will you see them saying the Earth is a ball of molten lava. In fact, the final proof comes from seismology itself. When an earthquake occurs, seismic waves travel out in all directions throughout all the Earth. There are two types of seismic waves, P waves and S waves. Based on this, scientists know that all of the Earth is actually quite rigid and composed only of rock. The only partial exception is the outer core. Take a look at the seismic diagram. If the Earth were truly molten, then seismic waves would not be able to travel throughout the Earth. So the fact that seismic waves can travel through and around the Earth shows that it is mostly completely rigid and solid. I wondered if it was possible for a hollow Earth model to make seismic sense. It took me a long time, but eventually I discovered only one model which could work. Here it is. Note how some of the seismic waves travel across to the opposite side of the Earth. I will explain the logic behind each aspect of this model. Let me explain the meaning of the different spheres on this model. Take a look at the right-hand side of the sphere. There you will see a green color near the surface. The outermost sphere is the crust. It is only 20 miles thick. The sphere beneath it is the mantle. Inside it is the outer core, and the white sphere at the center is the inner core. This diagram was generated using a computer program. All I did was assume that the inner core at the center is hollow. As you can see, this model already has the ability to let seismic waves travel from one side of the Earth to the other, bypassing the hollow center and making it appear as if the planet is solid. Let me explain why seismic waves do not travel in straight lines. When a wave travels through matter, which is increasing in density, it will be refracted. If you look at traditional seismic diagrams, you will see the seismic waves always curve away from the dense matter towards matter of lower density. So on a solid Earth model, where density keeps on increasing as you go deeper, the seismic waves will always curve back up to the surface of the planet. I wondered what would happen if deep down density actually began decreasing. Imagine that if you went into the planet, the matter became denser and denser, but halfway down it suddenly began growing less dense. How would that affect seismic waves? In this diagram, I made the assumption that the density was decreasing between the outer core and the inner core, where this line is. Therefore, any seismic waves which penetrate that far will suddenly be refracted in the opposite direction instead of curving towards the surface of the Earth. They will instead curve in the opposite direction. As you can see, this solves the problem of how seismic waves would travel to the opposite side of a hollow planet. However, if we start making some modifications to this model, then the results become even more interesting. This image is from a university textbook on global seismology. It shows something which is not easy to explain using solid Earth seismology. Approximately 7,000 miles from the epicenter of an earthquake is a region which receives less seismic waves than any other part of the Earth. This is referred to as the shadow zone. The shadow zone is not completely devoid of seismic waves. Look at the dotted line in the center of the diagram. These are supposed to be the few seismic waves that do manage to get into the shadow zone. This is difficult to explain using the solid Earth model. As you can see in the diagram, they have to assume a rather complicated seismic path to attempt to explain why some waves reach this region. As you can see from that diagram, there should not be any seismic waves reaching that area at all. Now let's go back to my hollow Earth seismic model. I have made some modifications to it. I have changed the size of the different regions. Now look at how well this model fits the facts we know about global seismology. After changing some parameters in my hollow planet seismic model, I have a shadow zone that matches the facts exactly. I made the cavity smaller, and I moved the point of maximum density, which is that line here, I have moved the point of maximum density somewhat lower. Note, the green area near the surface is the shadow zone. Look at the results. We have waves behaving as normal right up to 103 degrees, where the shadow zone begins. Then suddenly there are very few waves inside the shadow area. And then after the shadow zone, there are a greater and greater number of ray paths, eventually converging on the other side of the Earth. This is exactly consistent with the known facts of global seismology. Sometimes small things can make a huge difference. It is obvious from the hollow planet diagram why there should be a shadow zone. This is caused by the gradual change from increasing density to decreasing density. This causes the waves to split over here at this point. Some go down while others go up. This results in an area on the surface which receives less seismic waves than normal, hence the shadow zone. A really crucial point is that the shadow zone is not completely devoid of waves. In the hollow planet model, you can see why this is so. Another fact which also fits well is that the seismic waves tend to converge on the other side of the Earth, opposite the earthquake. You can see this reflected in the diagram as the P waves converge on the other side of the cavity. Let us take another look at a solid Earth seismic model. I now want to discuss in more detail facts we know about seismic waves, which are thought to pass through the core of the Earth, these ones over here. This, no doubt, convinces scientists that the Earth must be solid. However, I want to show you some interesting things about these waves. I now want to show you both the inner and outer cores do not actually exist. There are two kinds of seismic waves. P waves, which are much like sound waves. They are pressure waves caused by a direct push through matter. And then there are S waves, shear waves, which move from side to side rapidly. P waves can travel through everything except a vacuum. It is important to understand that S waves can only be transmitted through rigid materials like rock. It has long been known to scientists that unlike P waves, which can travel around the world, S waves are in fact blocked. They are blocked by something inside the Earth. They named this something the outer core. They decided the outer core had to be non-rigid. If the outer core were a type of liquid, then P waves would not be able to pass through it, but S waves would be. Hence, they invented the idea of the outer core. Very early on, when I became interested in the hollow Earth idea, I realized this property of the outer core, and I wondered if the outer core was a liquid or if it was, in reality, a cavity. Now let me show you that the outer core does not exist at all, while the inner core is merely the part of the Earth in the immediate vicinity of the cavity. The waves we are interested in are those that pass through the core. These ones here called PKP and PKIKP. The waves which pass through the core are supposed to be going in a straight line. Scientists have realized that these waves slow down for some inexplicable reason. What makes this even more curious is that P waves are supposed to speed up when they pass through dense material. And there is no place on the planet which is as dense as the core. So why do P waves then slow down? According to the formula for the transmission of sound and pressure waves, speed is affected by two factors: density and elasticity. As a rough rule of thumb, if the density increases, then the seismic waves will travel faster. Scientists try to explain the slowing down of the seismic waves by saying that elasticity has changed deep inside the Earth. This is how they manage to avoid the problem. However, the hollow Earth model provides us with a better solution. take a look at the ray paths of the seismic waves which reached the other side of the Earth. The ones that went beyond the shadow zone. Look at the paths they traveled. They did not travel through the core. They took a longer path around the cavity. They were the waves which traveled near the cavity, hence near the area of lowest density. From this diagram, we can see two reasons why these waves would take longer to reach the other side of the Earth. Firstly, they would not be traveling in a straight line. They would be traveling around a cavity, so they would have a much longer distance to travel. Secondly, remember this model is based on increasing density as you go deeper into the Earth, followed by decreasing density. So the inner part of the Earth would have quite a low density. A low density would cause the waves to also slow down. So both those factors would cause the waves to take a longer time to travel to the other side of the Earth, thereby giving the appearance that they slowed down. So once more, we find a perfect match between the hollow planet seismic model and what we know about global seismology. And as you can see, this explanation accounts for everything we know about global seismology, and we did it without needing either an inner core or an outer core. In order for the solid Earth seismic model to work, one needs to assume that the different parts of the Earth are composed of matter, which varies a great deal in density. But when dealing with the hollow Earth, the opposite is true. In order for hollow Earth seismology to work, one only needs to assume that most of the Earth is composed of pretty much the same material. Hollow Earth seismology will work perfectly well if we assume that most of the Earth is composed of the same rock and matter which we are familiar with here on the surface. If we could prove that much of the Earth is composed of the same material, then that would also be the proof that the Earth is in fact hollow. Look at this diagram. It shows how seismic waves supposedly speed up as they go deeper into the Earth. Notice how those passing through the core do not speed up. You will notice at various depths, such as at 5,000 kilometers, the speed of the waves change very sharply. They either speed up or slow down. Scientists look at these sharp changes in speed and then state that this is due to sharp changes in density. They use this to further prove that the mantle is composed of a different type of material to the outer core or the inner core. You have seen the hollow Earth seismic model and how a seismic ray's path may differ radically from the solid Earth model. Supposing the Earth really is hollow, then it would follow that the paths of waves differ a great deal from what scientific theory supposes, as I showed you with those waves, which are thought to pass through the core. In such a case, scientists may suppose a certain ray speeds up or slows down, when in fact it does nothing of the kind. If they knew the correct paths of the rays going through the core, for example, then it might turn out that such rapid changes in speed never actually occur. However, since scientists are obsessed with the need to have a model which matches the 6 trillion tons needed according to their gravity experiments, they need to find a way of packing lots of matter into the Earth. So they are looking for evidence of changes in density. I'm sure that when they find, they have to account for certain behavior by postulating such instantaneous increases or decreases in speed that it makes them feel confident that they are on the right track. But the opposite may be true. It is entirely possible that if one knew the exact paths of the rays, then one would find that the seismic wave speeds do not actually vary that much. Let me show you evidence that the Earth deep down is really very similar to the Earth near the surface. Take a look at this diagram. It shows the number of earthquakes which occur at various depths inside the Earth. You will notice along the bottom that earthquakes occur up to a depth of 700 kilometers down. Notice how there are less and less earthquakes up to a depth of 300 kilometers. Then they increase at a depth of 500 to 600 kilometers and finally stop at a depth of 700 kilometers. According to scientists, pressure increases with depth. According to their calculations, the pressure is so great that between 70 and 150 kilometers down, all rock will begin to flow. Below 150 kilometers, there is no known material which will not flow. Therefore, according to scientists, there can be no earthquakes with epicenters deeper than 150 kilometers. But there are tens of thousands of earthquakes that have epicenters deeper than 150 kilometers. The diagram shows us some curious things. Note how earthquakes are occurring at depths below 150 kilometers and in a region where it is theoretically impossible for them to occur. It is these quakes below 150 kilometers that are a mystery to science. These are known as deep quakes. Scientists try to explain these quakes by invoking various possible strange properties of matter. Although each theory advanced so far has had a problem with it. What no scientist on Earth is willing to accept is that maybe gravity does not behave the way they believe it does. That diagram may be the proof that gravity does not behave as it is expected at those depths. That diagram may be the clear evidence that the Earth does not have those pressures inside it, and that it remains relatively cool down to those great depths. As a final note, it may be that there are quakes deeper than 700 kilometers, but they are so far away, and maybe the effects of gravity are so weak that they do not have enough force for us to detect them. There are some seismologists who have speculated about the possible existence of silent earthquakes, which are undetectable by modern equipment. And that is hollow earth seismology in a nutshell. I think we have time for questions if anyone is interested in asking.
Yeah, that was fascinating. So what about the classic holes at the poles kind of ideas and stuff? Maybe does that fit with your seismology?
You had to take us there, huh? I was hoping to avoid that one. It is something that I dug into a lot. At various times I've looked at it from different angles. I started out firstly by just looking for photographs of holes at the poles. And in my book I have a collection of probably more than 20 photographs that could be interpreted as holes at the poles. And lots of them have probably never been seen by any of you before. I actually spent quite a many months looking for these photographs, trying to find them, trace them back to the original satellite and that sort of thing. In the end, I actually concluded that none of those photographs actually represented a hole at the pole. In each case, there was a real explanation that actually fitted it quite fine. For example, sometimes it was simply cloud formations. I even had a mathematician come and calculate the positions of these features that we saw. But in each case, we could actually pin it to a certain geographical feature, and it's actually amazing how many such photographs are around. But none of them were enough to prove that there is a polar hole. However, what I also did was I dug into Arctic history, and I didn't just do the normal thing of reading about Admiral Byrd or the Nazis or any of that stuff. I actually ignored all of those things. What I did was I read normal polar history and looked into things to see if I could find evidence of something that's not supposed to be there. For example, I had heard that animals had been seen going north for winter, and I'd heard that there were islands that had once been on maps and then taken off. And as I dug into Arctic history, I did find some very strange things. And a lot of them centered around a region in the ocean, north of Canada, more to the northwest of Canada, and to the north of Alaska. And it strangely coincides with the region that is where the geomagnetic pole is. And there were lots of mysteries there. There were things to do with land that had been mapped. There was even the suggestion of a continent that existed north of Alaska. And as I dug into the Arctic history, there were some tremendous mysteries that I uncovered. And I would like to actually dig more into this. I have even suggested to people, I wish I could hire an aeroplane or go to certain places and actually conduct certain experiments. For example, there's a place off the northern coast of Canada where you can actually see land which is not supposed to be on a map. And as you saw earlier on in the presentation, Dr. Cook had, for example, photographed a place called Bradley Land. And you see that photograph there, but that place, and he told us exactly where he was at the time he took the photograph. You will not find that place on any map anywhere. And if you look at the Arctic Sea is actually quite shallow. And a strange feature of the Arctic is that it is, for such a large area, it actually has no islands on it whatsoever, even though it is a shallow sea. But take a look at any other ocean on the Earth, and you will see islands there. And so I sometimes wondered if there were things that had just been blotted off the map, and the map made to look as if it's just ocean. There are many other things. For example, Admiral Perry, when he was in the north of Greenland, Eskimos told him that volcanic ash had actually fallen on a part of Greenland. And so Admiral Perry then said that judging from the wind currents, this volcanic ash must come from a volcano somewhere far in the north. But nobody ever found such a volcano. And the most interesting thing I discovered, and this actually only happened after my book had been published, was that there had been an expedition in 1914 to a place called Crocker Land. Now, Crocker Land was marked on maps until the 1920s. The US Navy actually sent a very big expedition to Crocker Land, and they couldn't quite reach it, but they did see it. And one of the people on that mission, a Lieutenant Commander Green, actually wrote an article. He actually was a scientist as well. And Green actually wrote an article about the possibility that there was a huge continent to the north of Alaska. And this idea had actually been suggested by one of the US geodetic scientists. He had said that tides to the north of Alaska were weird in the sense that it was as if there was an object in the ocean to the north of Alaska which was interfering with the flow of water. And this was backed up later on by sightings of land by people like Dr. Cook, Admiral Perry, etc. There were actually a lot of people who saw land, and those names, and it's all written about in Arctic history, but you will find that none of those things, in the end, they just conclude, oh, there's nothing there. And you'll actually find that the Russians had a similar experience on their side of the Arctic. There were islands which they saw and which they mapped, and which they later on then went and took off maps. One of those places was called Sannikov Land. With regard to the holes at the poles, I dug into ways of trying to prove whether there could be polar holes or not. I could never find a photograph that I believed was genuine. But what I did find was that you could, through other ways, possibly infer the existence of a polar hole. One of the ways was to do with Chernobyl. When there was the nuclear accident at Chernobyl, there was low-lying radiation which moved to the north. Now, one thing which I discovered was that in meteorology, all atmospheric currents move away from the equator to the polar regions. And I actually spoke to an American Air Force colonel who used to go and sort of spy on whether the Russians were actually conducting nuclear tests. And the way that they did it was they would send an aircraft up to the North Pole, and it would collect air samples. And just by picking up air samples from the North Pole, Americans can tell you if the Russians have exploded a nuclear device above ground or not. And so, with the Chernobyl mystery, what happened was, after Chernobyl, there were some American scientists who were at the South Pole, and they were digging in the snow. And they were actually measuring radiation levels. And the snow in Antarctica actually piles up at a very fixed rate. It piles up at 1 foot per year. And because it's so cold there, the ice does not melt. So what happened was these scientists were digging into the snow and using it like the rings on a tree, because by just going deeper and deeper and deeper, you could tell which year the radiation fell. So what happened was they found that at a time that coincided with about 2 years after Chernobyl, that there was a very sharp jump in radiation at the South Pole. And the radiation from Chernobyl has a very particular isotope that does not occur in nature. And so these scientists were actually very surprised to find that there had been an increase in radiation near the South Pole about 2.5 years after Chernobyl. But here's where the mystery came. Scientists know about the flow of air from the equator to the poles. So the way the cycle works is it flows from the equator to the pole, back to the equator, back to the same pole. In other words, the airflow stays in each hemisphere. So air in the northern hemisphere hardly ever reaches the southern hemisphere. And the scientists had found evidence of nuclear radiation all over the northern hemisphere, but they never found any at the southern hemisphere except at the South Pole. And so that was one of the things I thought could possibly indicate that maybe that air had gone from Chernobyl to the North Pole, gone through the Earth, and reached the South Pole. And the interesting thing was this time delay. And the scientists discovered that there was a time delay of 2.5 years. There was another thing that I also looked into, and that was meteorology. In meteorology, the scientists can only predict weather for a certain time into the future. And all their calculations are finely based. They're done on temperatures and pressures that they've measured throughout a hemisphere. And what scientists have discovered is that their calculations, no matter how hard they try, their calculations are only accurate for a certain period of time. It's 2 or 3 weeks. And I'm sure many of you will question even that. But the only way they got around it was another scientist came along and came up with a thing called chaos theory. And he basically tried to say that maybe it is actually impossible to predict the weather. And he tried to invoke some sort of atomic level ideas. Okay? But now the issue is predicting the weather shouldn't be such a big mystery. It should actually be quite simple. If you know the pressures and you have the formula, you should be able to calculate the results. If you can calculate the results for 2 or 3 days, there's no reason why you can't calculate it for 2 or 3 months or a longer period than that. And the one thing that nobody would ever consider is the possibility that what if the Earth is hollow? What if there is a polar hole? What if there is atmosphere inside the Earth? Because then what would happen is as the seasons change on the outside of the Earth, you would have air moving into the Earth or out of the Earth. And it would be large quantities of air. And any mathematical calculation you have, if you don't take that into account, the whole calculation will fall apart over a period of time. So those were 2 of the things that I found that could indirectly indicate there might be a polar hole. There was a third thing, and it has to do with the aurora, and it's very complicated. But I wrote a whole chapter about the aurora, and I even spoke to the leading geophysicist at the University of Alaska about auroras. And he sent me books, and we discussed the issues back and forth for months on end because it's a very technical subject. But what came of it was that there was a series of experiments that scientists carried out where the way the aurora is supposed to work is you have charged particles coming from the sun, and they bounce back and forth from the North Pole to the South Pole. So the theory goes. And scientists actually sent aircraft from New Zealand and also from Alaska to different parts of the Earth. And they then injected certain things into the atmosphere and actually measured the movement of these ionized particles from the north to the south. And one of the things they discovered was that there is something that controls the Earth's magnetic field, and that thing creates pulses, and that thing is located at the equator. Now, the center of the Earth would also be at the same level. And there were indications to me that there was radiation that might actually be emanating from inside the Earth. One of the things that they don't tell you, for example, is that when charged particles come from the sun and they create the aurora, when they arrive at the Earth, their speed is so slow that they don't have enough energy to actually create the aurora. And scientists know that there is something, and they don't know what this thing is, but it speeds up the charged particles by 200 times. They have no idea where the energy comes from. And in my book, what I did was I actually tied it to the hollow Earth. And I'm sure some of you have heard of the Van Allen radiation belts. And one of the ideas I just put forward in my book was that if the Earth is hollow, could it be that the radiation is actually circulating not only outside the Earth like a donut, but also through the Earth? And could it be that it's speeding up? And there were a whole lot of things related to nuclear activity, which I also discovered. And one of the people, one scientist that I discovered that I would like everybody to go and take a look at is a guy by the name of Dr. Marvin Herndon, because he's busy working on some nuclear theory to explain the Earth's magnetic field. And this could actually have a very valid application for the hollow Earth and could be part of the proof that the Earth might be hollow. Okay. What scientists do is they don't look at seismic waves as an element by itself. They apply a mathematical filter, and that filter is the solid Earth. And so what I was trying to do was I was trying to take the solid Earth out of the equation and say, well, let's look at it just from another point of view. Is the other point of view possible? The explanation when you use the hollow Earth idea is actually a smoother one. You don't have to assume many different things. The simple diagram hits the nail on the head the first time round, whereas with the solid Earth, those particular points that I raised have to actually require special study, and some of them are still actually unexplained or not well explained. It's best to compare it with the Greeks. The Greeks used to say that the planets moved in circles around each other, and then they found that, well, it's not exactly a circle, so then they'd put a circle within a circle, and then another circle within another circle. So they always made small changes to their theory, whereas in fact what was needed was a whole new theory which just said you move in an ellipse. Okay, and it's a similar kind of thing. Scientists take the current theory, it doesn't fit exactly, and then they make small modifications here and there to get it closer, but they're complicated and they're cumbersome. Whereas I'm trying to show that this is just a paradigm shift. You just jump into a new idea, and the new idea has all the answers to the things that were bothering you. One of the people I spoke to when I actually did my book was a professor of mathematics. And I said to him, what if you take a cloud of matter and you rotate it? What would the result be? Could you say that a rotating cloud could form a hollow shell or a solid planet? And he actually came and said to me, it would form shells of different density, and one of them could possibly, and the inner ones would actually be the lighter ones, okay, and it could also be hollow. And I played around with the idea. I didn't put too much effort into how it would form, but I did think that there were two possible explanations if a planet was hollow. The one was either it was solid to start with and actually became hollow as a result of something. The one thing I speculated about was the possibility of a nuclear reaction actually generating enough heat to melt the interior of the Earth and actually push it out via volcanoes, leaving a cavity at the center. The other one was just to assume that it forms as a result of rotation. And that is actually the idea that I favor the most. And if it forms as a result of rotation, then it won't collapse, because what happens is part of the matter is thrown away by the centrifugal force and the other matter is attracted by gravity, and then it forms a shell. I explored the polar hole for the reason that it actually forms about 90% of all of the older texts about the hollow Earth, because none of them touch seismology or anything. They're all concentrated with this idea of a polar hole and being able to go into the Earth. So I did look into it from that angle. But I also considered the possibility that there are other reasons why you might not find it. For example, I looked into the possibility of how would it affect navigation. Could it be that somebody would actually travel and not realize exactly where they are if the Earth's curvature was different, and all those sorts of things. In my book, I called it a feasibility study because I was trying to test an idea that everybody said was impossible, and I was trying to look at it from different ways. But I did put one chapter in there called Religion and Legends, and the point of the chapter was just to say to people, you know, that if you go and look in certain religious texts, be it Christianity or the Buddhists or those, you will find some pretty strange references which could indicate that people live underground. For example, the Buddhists believe in a place called Aghata, which they say is an underground empire ruled by a man called the King of the World. And even in Plato, in Plato's Republic, he wrote about the God who lives at the center of the earth. So some of these could be references to another civilization.
The biggest cover-up of all time is the fact that there is a civilization of people living in the center of Earth, whose civilization's name is known as Agartha. This may be hard for some of you to believe, but some claim to have an absolute knowingness of the truth of this. To begin with, the Buddhists, in their theology, fervently believe in its existence. They believe it to be a race of supermen and women who occasionally come to the surface to oversee the development of the human race. They also believe that this subterranean world has millions of inhabitants and many cities, and their capital is Shambhala. The master of this world was believed to have given orders to the Dalai Lama of Tibet, who was his terrestrial representative. His messages were being transmitted through certain secret tunnels connecting this inner world with Tibet. The famous Russian channel Nicholas Rurik, who was a channel for the ascended master El Morya, claimed that Lhasa, the capital of Tibet, was connected by a tunnel with the inner earth. The entrance of this tunnel was guarded by lamas who were sworn to secrecy. A similar tunnel was believed to connect the secret chambers at the base of the Great Pyramid at Giza and Agartha. The Indian epic, the Ramayana and the Bhagavad Gita are the two most famous texts of India. The Ramayana tells the story of the great avatar Rama. The Bhagavad Gita tells the story of Krishna. The Ramayana describes Rama as an emissary from Agartha, who arrived on an air vehicle. This is quite extraordinary in that both the Buddhist and Hindu religions separately refer to Agartha. The first public scientific evidence occurred in 1947, when Admiral Richard E. Byrd of the United States Navy flew directly to the North Pole, and instead of going over the pole, actually entered the inner earth. In his diary with other witnesses, he tells of entering the hollow interior of the earth and traveling 1,700 miles over mountains, lakes, rivers, green vegetation and animal life. He tells of seeing monstrous animals resembling the mammoth of antiquity, moving through the underbrush. He eventually found cities and a thriving civilization. His plane was finally greeted by flying machines, the type he had never seen before. They escorted him to a safe landing place and he was graciously greeted by emissaries from Agartha. After resting, he and his crew were taken to meet the ruler of Agartha. They told him that he had been allowed to enter Agartha because of his high moral and ethical character. They went on to say that ever since the United States had dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they had been very concerned for their own safety and survival. They had decided that it was time to make greater contact with the outside world to make sure we didn't destroy this planet and their civilization with it. They had been allowed in for this express purpose, as a way of making contact with someone they trusted. To make a long story short, Admiral Byrd and his crew, upon their visit, were guided by their hosts in their plane back to the outer world. And their lives were changed forever. In January 1956, Admiral Byrd led another expedition to the Antarctic. In this expedition he and his crew penetrated for 2,300 miles into the center of Earth again. Admiral Byrd states that the North and South Pole are actually two of many openings to the center of Earth. This sure resembles Jules Verne's famous science fiction book, Journey to the Center of the Earth, which many of you may have read or watched the movie. Admiral Byrd also states inner Earth has an inner sun. Admiral Byrd's theory is that the poles of the Earth are convex, rather than concave. Ships and planes can actually fly or drive right in. The American press announced Admiral Byrd's discovery. However, it was immediately suppressed by our good friends, the secret government. Ray Palmer, the editor of Flying Saucer magazine, did a detailed story on Admiral Byrd's discoveries. The United States government either bought, stole or destroyed almost every copy, and then destroyed the plates at the printing press. According to rumors, the exact same thing happened in respect to an article done on Admiral Byrd's discovery by the National Geographic. The magazine was released and the US government gobbled up almost every issue. If the story wasn't true, how come the government was so uptight? Another interesting fact is that the United States government does not let planes fly over the poles. All flights are directed to go around the poles, and any airline pilot flying in these areas will tell you this. Another interesting phenomena is the fact that the icebergs are composed of fresh water and not salt water that drift from the poles. Another interesting question is why it is warmer nearer the poles than it is 600 to 1,000 miles away from it. One of the early writers to present the theory of the Earth being hollow with openings at its poles was an American thinker, William Reed, author of the book, Phantom of the Poles, published in 1906. This book provides an early compilation of scientific evidence, based on the reports of Arctic explorers, in support of the theory that the Earth is hollow with openings at its poles. Reed estimates that the crust of the Earth has a thickness of 800 miles, while its hollow interior has a diameter of 6,400 miles. Reed summarizes his revolutionary theory as follows. The Earth is hollow. The poles, so long sought, are phantoms. There are openings at the northern and southern extremities. In the interior are vast continents, oceans, mountains and rivers. Vegetable and animal life are evident in this new world, and it is probably peopled by races unknown to dwellers on the Earth's surface. Reed pointed out that the Earth is not a true sphere, but is flattened at the poles, or rather it begins to flatten out as one approaches the hypothetical North and South Pole, which really do not exist because the openings to its hollow interior occur there. Hence the poles are really in mid-air, in the center of the polar openings, and are not on its surface as some discoverers of the poles suppose. Reed claims that the poles cannot be discovered because the Earth is hollow at its pole points, which exist in mid-air, due to the existence there of polar openings leading to its interior. When explorers thought they reached the pole, they were misled by the eccentric behavior of the compass in high latitudes, north and south. Reed claims that this happened in the case of Peary and Cook, neither of whom really reached the North Pole, as we shall later see. Starting at 70 to 75 degrees north and south latitude, the Earth starts to curve inwards. The pole is simply the outer rim of a magnetic circle around the polar opening. The North Magnetic Pole, once thought to be a point in the Arctic archipelago, has been lately shown by Soviet Arctic explorers to be a line approximately 1,000 miles long. However, as we stated above, instead of being a straight line, it is really a circular line constituting the rim of the polar opening. When an explorer reaches this rim, he has reached the North Magnetic Pole, and though the compass will always point to it after one passes it, it is really not the North Pole, even if one is deluded into thinking it is, or that he discovered the pole due to having been misled by his compass. When one reaches this magnetic circle, meaning the rim of the polar opening, the magnetic needle of the compass points straight down. This has been observed by many Arctic explorers who, after reaching high latitudes, near to 90 degrees, were dumbfounded by the inexplicable action of the compass and its tendency to point vertically upward. They were then inside the polar opening and the compass pointed to the Earth's North Magnetic Pole, which was along the rim of this opening. As the Earth turns on its axis, the motion is gyroscopic, like the spinning of a top. The outer gyroscopic pole is the magnetic circle of the rim of the polar opening. Beyond the rim, the Earth flattens and slopes gradually toward its hollow interior. The true pole is the exact center of the opening at the poles, which consequently do not really exist. And those who claim to have discovered them did not tell the truth, even if they thought they did. Having been misled by the irregular action of the compass at high latitudes. For this reason, neither Cook nor Peary nor any other explorer ever reached the North or South Poles, and never will.
Admiral Byrd was sent to Antarctica. Publicly, it was just a research expedition. However, the amount of manpower sent was huge compared to the former Nazi Antarctic expedition. The massive Antarctic task force included 4,700 men, 13 ships, and multiple aircraft. Just to give you an impression of the scale of this operation. Admiral Byrd comments in his press release of November 12, 1946, stated that the purposes of the operation are primarily of a military nature. That is to train naval personnel and to test ships, planes, and equipment under frigid zone conditions. A major purpose of the expedition is to learn how the Navy's standard everyday equipment will perform under everyday conditions. Operation High Jump was designed to last 8 months. However, they returned after 2 weeks, losing many heavy equipment and planes. And now we have to wonder, was Operation High Jump a cover to finish off Hitler? With the amount of manpower sent, it could be the case. But did they succeed to destroy the last Nazi stronghold? Judging by their early departure, I have a feeling they failed to wipe out the remaining Germans. On the way back from his disastrous mission, Byrd gave an interview to a prestigious newspaper in Chile on March 5, 1947. The article states, Admiral Byrd declared today that it was imperative for the United States to initiate defense measures against the possible invasion of the country by hostile aircraft operating from the polar regions. As regards the recently terminated expedition, Byrd said that the most important result of the observations and discoveries made is the current potential effect which they will have on the security of the United States. Well, this of course is the censored version. Others claim Byrd had actually warned the United States government for an enemy that was able to fly from pole to pole in several minutes. And the most bizarre rumor I ever heard is when Admiral Byrd returned home, he was invited by the president himself. The president wanted to hear what happened to Byrd and his Navy fleet. Well, Admiral Byrd allegedly begged and pleaded the president to nuke the hell out of the polar region. He urged the president to drop several nuclear bombs on the alleged Nazi fortress. According to many deathbed confessions by expedition members, the fleet was approaching the entrance of Base 211. All of a sudden, a fleet of UFO-type crafts emerged from the icy waters and attacked the fleet with fierce aggression. Several ships were sunk in minutes. Many sailors lost their life that day. Witnesses also stated that German ground troops were defending the entrance of the base with strange weapons that fired sonic waves. The whole experience must have been terrifying to Byrd and his men. Finally, Byrd gave the order to retreat. He knew that if he would stay there any longer, his entire fleet would be destroyed.